So welcome, everyone. And I believe we're going to start with Becky.
Thank you so much. I am honored to be a part of this. Admittedly, I only wish I was there in person. I actually am from the Los Angeles area and had a conflict with my daughter's schedule. Otherwise, a quick trip up to the Bay Area would not have been a problem. But I'm thrilled to welcome all of you into the Accenture offices. Just by quick way of introduction, I realize I know many of you in this room based on looking through the attendee list, but maybe some of you aren't familiar with me. And so I just want to take this moment to, many of you probably know my predecessor, Natasha Sunderjay. She left Accenture a couple of months ago to join the Welcome Trust as their chief strategy officer. And we're so excited for the opportunity that presents her, which then gave me a chance to step into the role of the lead of global health here at Accenture and the new executive sponsor from Accenture to the Bay Area Global Health Alliance. And so really excited for this new opportunity. Realize I have massive shoes to fill. I hope many of you know and loved Natasha, and she's going to continue to do work in this space, but has presented me an opportunity to step in and fill this role after working alongside of her for so many years. So I just want to thank you all. I can feel the energy in the room. This is what's great about global health and this community is this is really where big ideas meet real world impact, where global health isn't just about evolution, but acceleration. And I think that's what's so great and the kind of the special sauce of the Bay Area Global Health Alliance and the teams that are represented here today. So I just want to acknowledge that, we're standing at this moment of extraordinary challenge, which also couples with extraordinary possibility. Obviously, technology is advancing faster than ever, new models are emerging in the impact space. And this world is looking to organizations, really like all of you, to lead with courage, to lead with creativity, and more than anything, to lead with collaboration. And that's exactly what this alliance does and the value of this alliance. So, as I sit here, I'm jealous that I'm not in the room, but I think about, this is where we bring together the thinkers, the builders, the disruptors, and most importantly, the doers, the people that aren't afraid to roll up their sleeves, get into the mess of life and the mess of global health that it is right now, and really drive immeasurable impact. So I just want to confirm, here at Accenture, we're all in on that mission. We're here to scale digital health alongside you, to strengthen health systems, advance AI responsibly, to expand access and equity. And we're really committed to being that partner that listens deeply, collaborates boldly, and helps turn the promise of these ideas into everyday solutions. And so I'm thrilled to step into this role. I invite any of you that, I haven't maybe had a chance to meet. I'll put out my contact information, but would love to even just have conversations to hear how we can be a partner to you, how we can think differently, how we can, boldly be that partner that ushers in this new space of global health. And so, even if it's a coffee chat, you want to be a sounding board, I'm happy to do that alongside as many of you that want to take that opportunity. And so I'm just thrilled at what we can create together. This is an amazing agenda of some incredible speakers, incredible ideas. And so I really encourage you all, use this time together to collaborate, to think, to challenge, to kind of float new ideas. And I mean, honestly, I feel like so much of the value of these sessions isn't even so much what you say on this, amongst the speakers, but what are the ideas that spark in the collaboration moments? What are those networking moments? Or you grab a coffee and you talk to a partner and say, hey, I had this crazy idea. What do you think? I really invite you to take advantage of that. I also need to take a moment to thank the Accenture team. You've probably met or hopefully have met Colin Burton on my team. He leads our nonprofit practice here in the state of California. If you haven't had a chance to meet him, I encourage you to. He's absolutely brilliant. And then I'm not sure if she's on the line, but Diane Berlinski, also on the global health team over at Accenture. None of this would have been possible with all of her work behind the scenes. And of course, the event staff here at Accenture that makes my job look easy, but they do all of the coordination and things behind the scenes. So I just want to take a minute to recognize all of the work and of course the work of the Global Health Alliance that's been our partner along the way. So I invite you, thank you for welcoming me into this community. I invite you to, really take advantage of this between the speakers, the panels, and of course those collaboration and networking moments along the way. So thank you all and back to you.
Becky, thank you so very much. That was a wonderful way of opening us up and kind of introducing the Alliance and our program today. We're just so thankful to you and to Natasha before you and all of our partnership with Accenture. You guys have been amazingly generous with your space. We're so lucky as a nonprofit ourselves to have this gorgeous space in front of us today, and for making everything possible. To Diane, Colin, everyone. Everyone, I realize I haven't introduced myself. I'm Sarah Anderson. I'm Executive Director of the Bay Area Global Health Alliance, and it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces and many new faces as well. And I really welcome all of you online. We just really appreciate you joining us this morning. And before we get started, I just wanted to start with a little bit of gratitude towards all of our speakers and our moderators for joining us, to the board and for their leadership, and to our small but very, very mighty team for helping bring this gathering together. So Lisa and Abby are in the room at the back and happy to answer anything for you. We have Payam and Neha and Krista here for the board, who's there. Colin sends his regrets, but he's on his 30th wedding anniversary tour. So he is having a little bit of fun out there. So we miss him, but we wish him all the best there. For those of you who are rather new to the Bay Area Global Health Alliance, we are a cross-sector membership organization with 115 members from across the sectors. We really work to bridge technology and industry with the rest of the global health ecosystem. And for those who don't know exactly like, well, what do you do? We really serve as a trusted neutral convener and a connector. So what we really want to do is help accelerate what our members are doing and the social impact that they can have, but really to kind of just be together and connect, and to also kind of help in this really point of disruption that we're having in global health, especially around, and maybe try to make some sense of things and collaborate around, particularly around AI, financing, and policy. And so with that, let me just run quickly through the agenda. Right after this, Neha and I will kick us off with a State of the Alliance. At 9 a.m., we will turn to a fireside chat with Krista Donaldson, leading the moderating the chat with Rafi Kakorian, and we're thrilled to have that. We're at 10:15, we'll close with a cross-sector discussion on market shaping, and we're lucky to have Jesse here to help moderate that. And on the screen, you'll see this QR code. That's something you can click on it and get a link. And we also putting it in the chat for the full program, speaker bios, and everything else that you need. Just a little housekeeping. For those of you who are online, please don't forget to mute and see our other housekeeping tips on the slide. Also know that there's coffee and water and everything right outside the store, so help yourself throughout the meeting. But most importantly, we really hope today will, give you some new insights, help you make sense of some of the new things that are happening, but really, as Becky said, to build some new relationships and maybe just leave with a little bit more hope than maybe we did 18 months ago. So we're in a new era of global health, and I'm very excited that we're doing it together. So thank you again and for being here, and let's get started. So Neha, do you want to come take a chair? So Neha is our vice chair of the board, and she is also just an amazing director of strategy with PATH. And we're so lucky to have her here today to help us with this conversation. And is this where I should sit for the people that are looking on screen? Go over there. Well, thank you all. Um, most of the time we try to focus most of our attention on how we can support our members. But after the last annual meeting, we got a lot of feedbacks like, what about the Alliance? How are you guys coping in this? So we wanted to have a conversation today. And so I've asked Neha to come join me because she's been really instrumental in those strategy discussions that we're having about how this disruption in global health is really impacting the Alliance itself. So thank you, Neha. We all know this moment in time has really just, I don't know of a time that's been more disruptive. And there's so many things changing at once. The funding models, technology, partnerships, and even kind of the basic infrastructure that we're all used to working with. I mean, when you look at Ebola and all the viruses that are coming forth, it's just a different world that we're having to respond in a different way. But during all this disruption, the one thing that really surprised us is, this is kind of the most uncertain time of global health that we've had for decades. And the Alliance has actually grown faster than we have since our beginning years. So what that says to me is that community matters. People, we really started with just 16 founding members, and now we're 115. People are looking, all of you are looking and been told that you guys are looking for those trusted spaces to compare notes, to build relationships, and gain practical insights during this time of disruption and uncertainty. And so I'm just really thankful for Neha and for Krista to be part of those conversations on our strategy refresh. And one of the things that you said was that these shifts really aren't theoretical anymore, that people are really having to start to operate differently. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sarah. And hello, good morning to all of you. Really nice to see so many familiar faces. I think this is our 4th year at Accenture in this space. And so it's just this wonderful community that Sarah spoke to. Yeah, so I think in one of our recent discussions, we talked a bit about how the Alliance can really help around sense making. And I think all of us in the past 18 months have dealt with a lot of existential crises, who we are, what is the impact that we want to make. And I think consistently the Alliance has been able to shift that sort of theoretical conversation into a more practical one. Some of the areas of our programming around AI, sort of moving from this question of what is AI, how do I deploy it responsibly, to really thinking about, well, how do I make sure that the pace that I'm governing AI matches the pace at which I'm deploying it? Really thinking about partnerships, and how we prioritize. There's a lot of trade-offs that we're needing to make. And so how do we really be intentional in the partnerships that we are choosing to prioritize? How do we think about complementarity? How do we think about together reaching the impact quicker, faster, more efficiently? So I think another good example of sort of that practical evolution. Funding, top of mind for, I think, so many of us, right? Where is that gap going to be filled? And I think now we're at a place where we can be a bit more sophisticated in our search for funding, thinking about, well, what are the terms of the funding? Am I being asked to make compromises? Where is my mission drifting? And thinking about sustainability, how do we move from thinking about resilience to really thinking about, well, again, what do I want to make sure I hold on to and protect while maybe being able to let go of some of the extraneous or adjacent programming that we have. And I think throughout the past 18 months in particular, and as Sarah's mentioned, maybe it's unsurprising that we've had tremendous growth. I think because we're able to help our members sort of navigate some of these questions. A couple of things that are quite unique about the Alliance. You saw the slide earlier. 1/3 of our members are from the private sector, 40% represent tech. And so we're really unique in that way. And I think our value proposition is really bringing that multisectoral thought leadership connection to the table, as that is really one of the few ways that we can continue to sense make, right? Is bringing those diverse perspectives to the table. We are, as Sarah mentioned, going through a strategy refresh, and we were very excited to sort of bring some of that, bring you all behind the scenes and some of what we're exploring, but also what we want to protect and make sure we hold on to. And I think whether it's surprising or not to many of you, in the past few years, some of the organic areas where we've gone into AI at the intersection of global health, innovative financing, looking at sense making, I think those things have moved even closer to the center of the global health conversations. And so we feel value in maintaining that space. We feel value in sort of using this community to, again, make sense of how we move forward together. And so really our strategy refresh is less about reinventing ourselves and actually just sharpening our focus and really looking to all of you to help us define sort of what's ahead, where are you struggling, where can we do even better in the future. And so we'll circle back on this towards the end, but some of our value proposition that we'd love to validate and test with you is really looking at helping you all, our membership, navigate complexity faster, looking at how we build otherwise unlikely partnerships, and then really identifying where innovation and investment can really move the needle. So I welcome further discussion on this, but wanted to just give you a little bit of a sneak peek in terms of what we're thinking and where we're going.
Yeah, thanks so much, Neha. And I'm glad that you brought up those points. And one more that I wanted to bring up is when we ask, and we always have different surveys that are going on, and there'll be another one today. But what do you value the most? And one of the things that's the one-on-one connections. And I just wanted to kind of put out there that we're really a high touch, even though we're talking a lot about AI and technology and innovation, we're really a high touch organization. And I think most of you know that if you contact Lisa, Abby, or me, you're going to and say, do you mind introducing us to somebody? That's what we do. And another part of that is understanding, kind of being a code switcher of kind of translating how one sector works to another and trying to understand how can you may have this product or this service, how to make that most appealing to another sector. That's something else that we try to do. And that work may seem simple of just like doing connections and relationship building and a little bit of translating, but we really feel like that's the way you build trust. And we're not going to get anywhere if we don't build trust, right? And so we want to hold on to that high touch piece of who we are. And we just feel like it's really important so that you guys can make the best decisions, the best informed decisions that you can in your own work. Because ultimately, that's what we're here for, right? Is to help you all, our members, make a better decisions, make better strategic investments, so that you can make a greater social impact and advance equity and innovation. But like most organizations in global health, and I'm looking out at this room of amazing people, and I'm sure the people online would echo it, it's how can we be resilient and sustainable in these times? And that how are we going to get funding and things like that are on the top of our mind as well. And when we were starting to look at what does resilience look, we kind of went back to look at who is in our membership, where we are, and Neha gave a lot of the demographics. One thing that we wanted to also mention is that now we're fewer than 30% from the Bay Area. So we have, I think, about 17% LMIC based organizations. Most everyone is based in the US, but we also have a few European players with us. And so we wanted to kind of look to see how can we be more geographically agnostic, and I think I stole that word from you, that phrase, and globally connected, right? But we also kind of, the tension is like, how do we do that and still hold on to the roots that we have? And so we are looking to see whether our current name actually will still reflect who this community is and where, if it makes sense to keep it or not. But I did want to emphasize that we will completely hold on to our roots here. And we see ourselves, and our role of kind of one of our unique strengths is connecting and being that bridge builder between the larger global health ecosystem and tech and Silicon Valley. So that's another kind of tension and something that we're going through on that. And one of the things we want to do is, while we hold on to the kind of the openness and the collaboration that's in here, we also want to use that in thinking about ourselves. We usually come to all these convenings and talk about kind of other people and other things, but with ourselves, we really want that collaborative spirit. So we want that to shape where we're going and where we're headed as well. So we want your feedback. So on about every row, there's a little QR code, and we can have, you can see our survey there. And so we'd love that. Come talk to us, make an appointment with us. We really want your feedback.
Yes, and just to emphasize, I know that you all get requests for a lot of surveys, but this one is exceptionally important for us. So please do take the time to complete it. So I think we are right on schedule, and we did carve out a little bit of time right now for Q&A, just so that we can sort of meet the moment and take any questions around the Alliance itself. And Abby and Lisa in the back can help hand you a microphone if needed. And we've got several microphones up here as well. So any questions?
I think we have time for like 2. Marissa?
Thank you. Marissa Gilman, consulting at UCSF. I'm curious, as you become more geographically agnostic, how that's shifted the type of partnerships and collaborations that you all are orchestrating.
Well, I think one of the things that it depends on what our members ask for and need, but I think the tech component continues to be there, but maybe we're having more collaboration with tech partners and startups and entrepreneurs who are on the continent of Africa. And so that's that. I think David with Good Life is here. And that was one thing we did when we were in Kigali. We had this amazing convening on AI assisted tools for pharmacies. And so what does that look like? And bringing together David's group and some others, as well as the Global Fund. So those are the types of partnerships. So it's a little bit more, I think we've been inclusive and pretty deliberate about making sure we have somebody from LMIC, country-based organization, in all of our discussions, and we want to make sure that we continue that. So that's one thing with being geographically agnostic, but we'll still serve soup and have dinners and everything here in the Bay Area.
Maybe one more question. Anyone on the virtual call?
There's James.
Oh, James, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. James Baer, Baraka Impact Finance. You there? I'm just wondering about publicity, visibility, public exposure within the Bay Area, taking into account the goals around geographic agnosticism. It seems like there's an opportunity to be more visible within Bay Area communities. And wondering if you've thought much about that and what those avenues might be.
Yeah, it's a really great point, James. And that's the tension that we're dealing with. And I think the first tension is we haven't paid a whole lot of, we want to make sure that we're around and we're stable and we have a strong foundation, but we really haven't put ourselves out there much as the alliance itself. We have really, and some of our board members have really encouraged us to do more thought leadership. We have taken the stand in the past of these two partners need to tell this story and how can we help them get the publicity. But I do think that there is a point that as an alliance, we need to get out there now, and we're at that stage of growth. So thank you. All right. I think please keep asking us good questions, and we really want to bring you all on this journey with us. And with that, though, I do want to turn it over to Krista Donaldson, who is the Stanford Biodesign's Director of Innovation and Impact and an amazing board member with the Alliance, to help us with the keynote speaker with Rafi Krikorian and on AI. So I'll turn it over to Krista now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah and Neha. Rafi, I'm going to move you over more towards the middle since you're our guest of honor. Unfortunately, I'm going to put you under me, though. Yeah, okay, good. You're not, okay. I'm very excited to have this conversation. I'm not going to spend a ton of time introducing Rafi because you have his bio, and I really want to jump into conversation because it's such a treat to have you here today. So I just want to frame a little bit. We've been talking a lot for a while now about the role of AI in global health, and we're really lucky because Rafi not only has this incredible background in computer science, technology, innovation, the social sector, funding. And let me just jump into there in that sense. So Rafi, you do have us, and also the National Democratic Committee, by the way. You've just done a million interesting things.
That's either a good or bad thing.
Well, anyway, I think there's a lot we can learn from your very cool and very diverse career. And he's also chair of MEDIC, which is one of our member organizations since 2023. And so maybe just why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit about your interest in global health? I know you used to work at Emerson as well. Talk a little bit about that and your incredible background and how that relates to global health.
Really, I think the first time I sort of came into contact with global health question. So most of my career is generally about following my wife around. She is
not a bad thing.
She is an amazing woman. She's a Stanford professor. She's way smarter than I am. I'm just a person who used to write essays and podcasts. And so in 2009, she worked at the WHO in Colin Mather's group to work on the 2009 Global Health Risks Report.
Now you're on. Okay, keep going.
Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so she was working at WHO on the Global Health Risk Report. She's a computer scientist. She's a mathematician, and she did a lot of work in order to do accurate predictions for that report. And what it turned out that they ended up doing was not going with the most accurate models that she designed, but instead going with the ones that were easier to understand. And that actually stuck in my head for the longest time. Yeah. It was just you were in that case, the ability to understand it trumped accuracy in a bunch of different ways. And I feel like that's been a thread that's been playing out over and over and over again. But that was maybe my first time sort of experiencing both global health and what the interesting technical trade-offs might be around that. And then, I've been really fortunate around, a couple of years ago, I joined Emerson Collective as its CTO. I got to meet some amazing grantees. I got to meet some people in this room. I met Josh Nesbitt. I met Kassia Vanderhoef Holstein. And so through that work, I got really interested in how technology can actually make a change on the ground, but in very specific ways. How can you actually do it in in phrase you know well, like human-centered ways, or how can you do it sort of like empowering people as opposed to dictating people? And so I feel like those two threads have been converging my entire career, and just being able to do it at the scale of Medic and being able to work on those problems is just an honor, frankly. So that's basically how I end up in the space.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll return to some of those threads in a little bit. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Rafi's done some really great writing, both recently in the New York Times and the Atlantic. And I'm going to ask you to tell the story that you talked about in the Atlantic around an accident he had with his Tesla, because I think it really frames some of our conversation around AI. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. Can I ask how many of you own a Tesla or drive a Tesla every day?
You can admit it. You're in a safe zone. You're in a safe zone. You're in a safe zone here. Good intentions.
I mean, it is a wonderful physical car. I have no so I wrote this story in the Atlantic a few months ago where around November of last year, I was driving my son to a Boy Scouts meeting. We were cruising through the streets of Palo Alto. I actually had autopilot on at the time. Now, in my defense, one of the fortunate things I was able to do earlier in my career is I ran Uber's self-driving car team. So I ran it in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh is actually an insanely hard place to drive. If any of you have been there, it's incredibly hilly.
We see some nods of agreement in the audience.
The weather truly sucks. My wife made me sell my stick shift car when we moved to Pittsburgh, because she was like, I'm not driving this in Pittsburgh. We had to get a new car. And so I think I know a lot about self-driving cars. So I've trained lots of people to drive self-driving cars and how to react in bad situations, understand what they know, what they don't know. We were driving in full self-driving mode in the Tesla on the way to my son's Boy Scouts meeting. For those of you who know Palo Alto, we were taking a turn from onto Alma Street underneath one of the underpasses. It's a tricky turn. The lanes aren't really marked well. Lots of people decelerate super quickly to make that turn because it's a little confusing as what to do. The autopilot at that moment turned its wheel to make the turn, then jerked back, then jerked another time, and then we slammed into the wall at about 40 miles an hour. My sons were thankfully absolutely fine. I was knocked unconscious for a second. When I came to, my youngest son was standing outside the car, just like generally confused what was going on. My eldest son was finding my glasses because they were thrown from my face when the airbag hit me. And so like that, as a software engineer, as a person who works in AI, as a person who thinks about autonomy, for me, just really drove home, maybe pun intended, the way that this technology is being rolled out into the world, we really need to start asking some real questions about it. So maybe two ways to think about this Tesla accident from my point of view. One is the blame is on me as the driver. Like my insurance, like it was my name on the police report. It's my name on the insurance. Like the insurance effectively is written as I lost control of the car, which I suppose is technically true in that moment. But, and maybe I could have reacted faster. I mean, it takes, when you're sort of lulled into the safety of self-driving, it takes a while to context switch back into active driving. And, I've requested the videos of the crash. I've watched them multiple times. This all plays out in the order of 4 seconds, which is not quite enough time for someone to come to, like basically maybe I should have been paying attention more, but come to realize what's going on and take over. It wasn't possible, at least for me in that moment. So in some ways, like this technology has been hoisted upon all of us, and responsibility is thrown on us. And the phrase that I like to use and other people use in that zone is like, I'm the moral crumple zone for the car, of just like this system wasn't able to decide what to do. So at the last minute, I just threw it to the human with the hopes that the human can figure out what to do with it. So that seems crazy. And then the second is just mostly that we're being used as training mechanisms for these systems to be deployed in the world. So in some ways, like I'm again taking the risk. I'm actually paying for a product which was not cheap at the time, in order for me to be training data and then for me to take responsibility when that road. So I think a lot about this like moral crumple zone when it comes to autonomous machines generally, of just like, where does responsibility lie when all these systems are being deployed? When we start using them and they start making critical decisions, like who's going to make the ultimate call? You don't sue Tesla in that situation. Some people have tried and it's won in some cases, but this is going to play out over and over and over again in our world. And that question of responsibility, I think, is the biggest one.
I think there's so many interesting points you're raising. And one of the things you also talk about is these machines and these algorithms that are intending to build confidence, right? And build authority. And think about this in global health, right? Like we talk about like user-centered design, like building trust with different stakeholders. And you talk about that the AI, it's like it wants you to trust it.
100%.
But at the same time, like if something goes wrong,
I mean, you're so lulled into this notion of trust and complacency. Like I have a line in the piece, which is like, at some point, there's one thing which is driving a self-driving car and you get lulled into thinking that it's safe. And generally it's very safe on highways. Local roads are really
remember this,
really hard
everybody.
problem. Like I mean,
From the
we have the
expert.
exact same problem in Uber. Highways are actually a quite easy thing. Like even though you're moving faster, things happen slower. But the local roads are actually very hard. But that lulled into complacency at some point, like, for me, it's a car, for you, it's a chatbot, right? Like in some ways, like where does your thinking stop and where does the chatbot thinking start? It's becoming a very interesting, blurry question that we all really need to be asking ourselves, especially in this world. And I think about this, you go back to my wife's example, like not going with the most accurate model, but instead going with the most legible model. The bad version of that outcome is go with the model that sounds the most confident. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be right. It just sounded the most confident at the time. And that's exactly what these AI systems are programmed to do. Right now, they're like, I have another piece in Atlantic I call the validation machines. And what their entire job to do is to try to get you engaged with them. So they need to sound confident because the instant they don't sound confident, you'll stop using them. That breaks the business model that they're all operating under. So that sounding confident, that lullness into like just giving over agency, giving over thought to this. I mean, look, we as humans have the ability to anthropomorphize rocks, right? Like we all have pet rocks at some point. So like this is a pet rock. It just happens to talk to you. So like it's a very confusing thing for the human brain to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I think many of us, when thinking about this example, it's hard not to think about community health workers. And when I think back too about the history of user-centered design too, like centering the community health worker in the design, and it does feel like we're almost stepping back with AI. And a lot of the design is happening here, and I'm very cognizant we're here in the Bay Area. The design is happening here, and we're getting further disconnected.
Yeah, I get this question all the time of just like, what's Medic's AI strategy?
Why don't you tell us?
I mean, but a lot of people assume the goal is to remove community health workers from the loop.
Especially if you're wanting to build trust, it's like this tension again, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like you can make the argument that these systems know more, but like knowing more doesn't necessarily mean knowing better, like in a bunch of different ways. So like for us, I'm happy to talk about what we are landing on as our strategy, but like removing community health workers is not even in the conversation right now. Like, there's like classical tension when it comes to AI systems. Like, Stanford in the 70s, there was one lab that was working on automation of basically removing humans from the loop. And there was another lab working on augmentation, like giving humans superpowers. And I'm much more in that camp. So like maybe in a nutshell, the AI strategy for us is like, how do we superpower these community health workers? Like they already are the ones who are giving their time, their love, their energy, their care to the world. We don't want to remove it. I want to give them more time to do more of that in some way. So like we need to figure out ways to make that happen using these technologies. And so like I think a lot of the conversations that we should be having as a community is like how to make that world happen, because going into that world is actually maybe against what the big platform providers want to do with their technologies. And look, I used to work at big platforms that part of my career. I understand exactly where they're coming from. They're not necessarily doing it for evil reasons. It's just the incentive structure is kind of messed up. And so like trying to figure out how we as a community can create different incentives so that this technology can be deployed in a way that we can amplify love and care would be really interesting.
I want to push a little bit on that too, because you actually kind of framed where I wanted to go, which is what do you suggest to those of us in the room who are building tools? Like how do we center while building trust? Center our users, center our stakeholders. Could you maybe give an example or two?
I mean, I can tell you what we're trying to do at Medic, but maybe I'll overall phrase this for a second of just like the power actually rests in this room and rests in our organizations. Like, when I think about, I used to say this to grantees at Emerson all the time of like, well, Anthropic wants to make a deal with us or OpenAI wants to make a deal with us. It doesn't actually matter which company, any company that wants to make a deal with us, my response is just like, well, you have more power in that conversation than you think you do. Like for them, they want validation, they want proof points in the world, they want all these things, and you're the gatekeeper in some way. So you should be dictating the terms, not the other way around. So maybe I'll set that as like an overall frame.
I think this is a good reminder. I just want to interject because I do think, particularly in this world we're living in right now with funding, there's a bit of a scarcity mentality in global health. So when a big partner comes to us and wants to work with us, I think there isn't the sense that we can negotiate more. But so
you absolutely can.
Okay.
Like, I mean,
one of
I
our
think,
takeaways.
yeah, I mean, you absolutely can. I think you can absolutely set the terms. I mean, like, sure, you can't, like,
And you should set the
you
terms.
should absolutely set the terms. Like, obviously, be smart about it. Don't create an impossible situation. But like, they need you more than you, maybe not more than you need them, but they need you a lot in this equation. And so, like, maybe what I say when we think about developing tools is to go back to that human-centeredness in a lot of ways. Like, human-centeredness is not for me about like eliminating and making things frictionless and making things invisible behind
We're
the
going to come to
scenes.
that too.
It's a lot about like how do we make understanding legible? How do we make understanding simple so that, like, you know, I talk a lot about like this entire ecosystem we've created, at least in Silicon Valley, is one based around frictionless design. Like, make it really easy for you to buy something on Amazon. Make it really easy. Like, you know, if I could just have an Apple subscription plan and then a new device showed up, I would totally do it because like it was the easiest thing to go do. But there is benefit to friction. Like, there is benefit to actually like having a stumbling point. Like, I think about this a lot when it comes to, I'll go to another sector for a second. I think about this a lot when it comes to our kids. Like, I don't want their life to be easy.
Right.
Like, there is something to be said about productive struggle when you're in the middle of education. And so productive struggle is actually where the interesting thoughts in my mind, creativity comes out. So again, like, my goal isn't to be like a community health worker, one push button and then everything just happens. It's making it really easy for them to understand what's going to happen when they push that button so that they can be part of that conversation of like, is that button the right thing I should be pushing right now? And how do we learn from the person actually going to do that? So I think it's a lot about thinking about how do we like selectively have the right points of friction through the system. That's what human-centered design means for me.
I love that. Thank you for the shout out to human-centered design. I think I want to pick up on your thread too around incentive and friction, because one of the things many of you know with the Bay Area Global Health Alliance is we've done some real focus on partnerships, and I know we're going to talk more about that today, but it's already challenging to align incentives, right? Like, we may have a lot of folks in the room who will control AI and products and algorithms, and we have our partners that we're serving, the ministries of health, community health workers, patients ultimately, and it's already friction. Sure. So I think I would love to hear from you what your recommendations are too, because I think there is this tendency with AI to remove that, and this is a good example of where like we cannot not just for creativity, removing or reducing creativity, shall we say, but also reducing the very real hard conversations we need to have with partners.
I like to think about a little bit of how do we change the game in our to be in our favor.
Say more about that. Yeah.
So like what we think about at Medic a lot is like, how do we focus on open source? How do we focus on community? And how do we focus on local ownership? So like if we look through like those three lenses, like open source does a lot for us. Like open source is a great conversation to be had during the procurement strategy because like generally it's cheaper, generally. I mean, maybe when you do the TCO, it comes out to be just slightly
TCO
cheaper.
means?
Sorry, total cost of ownership.
Thank you.
It might be slightly cheaper, but generally it still ends up being cheaper. And it has the benefit that like I actually have control. And so like the way that we talk about it, at least to ministries, is that like this can actually be tuned to exactly what we need in this location. Like local ownership for me is sort of like paramount here. It's not about form fitting what the local people need to do to a workflow that was designed 6,000 miles away. It's about tuning the technology. It's about tuning the technology to the to the local workflow instead. So
Yeah.
we think a lot about that. And then we think about that local ownership. So like one of the things that we're doing at Medic is we're actually spinning off a whole organization that we're calling Medic Afia, which is meant to house all the local work we're doing in Kenya and Uganda, for example. And if that model works, we're going to spin off more of them in the other locations that we're working with. Instead of housing them in one global organization, which we've been doing for the past couple of years, like actually have a whole network of medics that are all in the local areas, because then they can tune better. They can like actually have people on the ground. We can hire people who are in that area. We can fundraise in that area. So I think that we want to just really change the game about like what that technology deployment and community really looks like. We can invest in local engineers actually building these technologies again, instead of having people 7,000 miles away going and doing it. So we really think that sort of like that lean in how technology should be developed and deployed is sort of like our wedge into that conversation.
That's very cool. And then it sounds like the different, I'm going to say chapters, that's not right. Okay. But then they can work to learn from each other as well.
100%. And
Okay.
so like we want to enable more people on the ground that are within hundreds of miles and thousands of miles, that kind of thing. And then of course we'll just have a bigger community of medic aligned people that are working in all the different problem areas, sharing different technologies, sharing different things across them. So one of the models we stole this from is, back in my grad school days, I worked with a professor called Neil Gershenfeld back at the MIT Media Lab. And what we did is we created a network of fab labs across the world. So we deployed $20,000 fabrication laboratories, and like they were super simple in the grand scheme of things. There were like a laser cutter, there were a 3D printer, there were a milling machine, a bunch of different tools, and we just deployed them into different areas of the world without really knowing what people would go do. But then they brought their own problems and tried to fix it using these tools that were available to them. So like people in Western Africa were experimenting with Maxwell's demons to try to do refrigeration using compressed air. People in Lapland in Norway were building RFID tags for their reindeer so they can better understand where their flock was going. And like these communities would then get together once a year online to just share what they've built. All their things were open source. There's a wiki page with everyone's like code or everyone's like PCB board that they've built and things like that. So that one's a little bit high level because you got to learn something about machining in order to participate there. But I want to live in the same world when it comes to open source and when it comes to global health, of just like I firmly believe that the needs of Uganda and the needs of Kenya are similar but not the same. And so like I want them to be able to own it slightly differently. But like you said, when we find something common, we should extract it and then we should share it. That's what like Medic Global's job will be, is just like not necessarily even doing rapid speed software design like we used to, but instead of holding the values of what that network should be doing and then moving technology around to try to find the right place for the right thing.
I also love that too, because I think many of us in the room, maybe it's our Silicon Valley ethos, we really love to hear about quote failures, our lessons learned, as we like to say in global health, because we don't have the incentives. But I also hope that too, the network will be able to share their learnings across it too, not just like what works.
No, I mean, I think a lot of it is just like, hey, we tried this and like, don't anyone try that. Like,
This is why it doesn't work.
Yeah. I think sharing negative examples. I think about this in AI all the time.
Yeah.
Like we only share positive training examples. We actually have to share negative training examples in order to make the system resilient.
That's awesome. I want to turn to security, AI and security. So one of the pieces that Rafi wrote about recently too was I'm going to keep going. I'm going to let you tell the story, but around the security breach. Yes, thank you. And then the $100 million credit.
Yeah. Well,
So back up and why don't you explain it as compared to my bullet point?
So Firefox is very fortunate. So for those of you who don't know, Firefox is one of the world's largest web browsers, not the world's largest, but it's a fully open browser. The existence of Firefox is the reason why the web is open today. Like Firefox was created in the 90s as a way to counter the Microsoft monopoly or the attempt of Microsoft to take over the web. So because Firefox exists and only a couple 100 million people use it, it's enough to force the web to be open. So it's a nice place to be because it means a lot of partners want to work with the Firefox team. So Anthropic approached us, let's call it January of this year, to run Firefox under Opus 4.6. It was one of their most advanced models at the time to try to find bugs in Firefox. And it found, let's call it on the order of 10 fairly critical bugs. This code base is 15 years old, and this new model was able to find about 10 bugs that no one has seen before. So the Firefox team rapidly closed them, and they were very grateful. That was amazing. A few months later, Anthropic reapproached us with, before we all knew it, a model that they were calling Mythos, and they asked if they could run it again on the Firefox code base, and it found 200 bugs. Again, literally bugs we've never seen before, but it was able to find 10x more bugs than the last time it found them. And we rapidly tried to close every single one of them. But that really got me to thinking all of a sudden of like, are we just all screwed at this point? Because like if these tools are now finding exploits in the world or could find exploits in the world, our entire digital infrastructure is basically built on the back of volunteers. Like, you know, if you think about the global health scenario and like it's built on like a lot, the healthcare system of Kenya is literally built on a nonprofit in the US that I happen to be the chair of, which is kind of nuts. The entire intranet is also done in the same way, like DNS, which is what the service that you use when you type google.com, it resolves it to an IP address. It's philanthropically funded and run by 3 guys. Like that's effectively all the people in the world that write that code. OpenSSL, which is when you go to HTTPS as opposed to HTTP. A few years ago, like a critical bug was found in OpenSSL, and it was one person. Like every company in the world was scrambling, and it was literally only one person who needed to go and like had to wake him up. He had to go fix the bug, and then every company
Not allowed to sleep.
every company in the world then had to deploy his code. Like critical infrastructure is being run this way, and now we have models that are able to find these vulnerabilities. So imagine what vulnerabilities are in our power grid, or imagine what vulnerabilities are in our phone system. And so what Anthropic did at that moment, which is understandable, but in my opinion, wrong, is that they created a coalition of, let's call it 12 companies, 15 companies, and gave them access to Mythos so that they could start securing their systems. Think people like Cisco are on the list to build networking switches. But that person who writes OpenSSL, that person who writes DNS, the person who writes curl, which is a piece of code that fetches stuff from the internet, every PlayStation in the world runs curl. Those people weren't given access. So we're in this like crazy arbitrage moment where like basically one company is dictating to the rest of the world who can be secure and who can't be secure. And so like one of the things I was calling for in this New York Times piece is like, we need to like actually understand who does critical infrastructure in this world. Like it's volunteers that are who are the what's the word, essential workers in a lot of ways, and we need to treat them like the essential workers they are. And so people like Anthropic should be banding together the entire industry to be funding these essential workers who are holding up our entire digital lives. And so like for me, like Anthropic just got to do better in this case. And the more nuanced problem here is that the open models are closing the gap. So like you can download a model from China right now, which is technically open weights is what they call it, that I think in 6 months we'll be able to find these bugs too. So like we're arguing about who should get access when in reality, the entire world is gonna have access in 6 months, and we just need to move faster on the understanding how to like, who should be critical workers and how do they get access to these type of things.
Okay, I'm going to ask you an operational
Go.
question, then maybe like theoretical. I think there's many in the room who are already using some of the AI, you know, the DHIS2 and the Open MRS. Do you have suggestions like operationally to prepare, or what should organizations be doing now to protect against this asymmetry, I guess? Yeah,
well, I mean, in those situations, I think there's a lot of questions that need to happen to the Open MRS team and stuff like that. I know they're on it. I know they're working well, but they need help in the grand scheme of things. And so like when we all are talking to the big companies who want to use us as deployment mechanisms, we should be flexing part of that power to be like, how are you helping Open MRS out right now? Can you give them access to Mythos? Can you give them access to some of your engineers to help them fix some of the critical bugs that might be found? Like we as a community could be using that as a point of leverage to make sure that our critical infrastructure is in the right place. I think that we also need to do a little bit of more education education amongst ourselves on like what it really means to be deploying these systems in the wild, and how what vulnerabilities those give up. Because we usually focus on the opportunities, we focus on like the socio negative effects, not the operational negative effects. And there are going to be a lot of them. And so like a better understanding of that is something that we all need to go do too.
Well, and I wonder if that's something that as a collective voice for the Alliance and for some of the other groups that are out there. And I'll just mention too, Open MRS is Open Medical Record Systems, and DHIS is District Health Information Software. And so looking at population and then also looking at medical records. And maybe we could also turn to open source too, because that's something that our community has some experience with. I would even say dating even back to like hardware and some of the challenges with that. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that too, and particularly your recommendations, like if there's one guy or three guys that are holding this really important framework up, like how do we make it more robust? How do we make it more sustainable in the future?
I mean, like I am loath to ask us to all give a little bit of cash to those guys. I know we're in
especially in a community that's already short
exactly.
cash.
We're already in a cash strapped environment, but that's fundamentally what they need. Is like they also need money, they also need resources, they also need people. Like, curl is an interesting example, that piece of code that fetches things from the internet, because like it's been mostly stable and no one's really worried about it until something like this showed up. So we also need to figure out like what's the right insurance plan for these guys, because if that one person disappeared, how do we have a succession plan on this critical infrastructure? But I think like one thing I would do if I were in all your positions, given this technological change we're under, is do a true audit of like, what are the systems you really depend upon? Like if they're not given to you by a vendor that you have a contract with for maintenance, et cetera, because you're relying on open source, better know that than not. So really understand like, where are those critical infrastructure points? Who are the people behind them? I'm very happy to help you find those people. That's for me, that's the easy part. But like, who are those people, and how do we feel that they are resourced or not? And I would also encourage you at that moment not to be like, we're not going to rely on them because they're so under-resourced. I think that's, again, the exact wrong response. I think what we should figure out instead is like, how are we going to give them more resources? How are we going to make sure that they are resilient, and the way that we use them as resilient is really the question.
Yeah, and I'm just going to repeat back a line you wrote that I was really struck by, which I think speaks to this. Like, if we don't do this, you wrote, when we ask AI a question, you're getting information that's produced at the intersection of someone else's values and someone else's incentives. And so this really, to me, especially in global health, really speaks to the need of needing to invest in these types of models and protect it for all of us. I would love to return a little bit back to Medic too, like what prompted the strategy change? And then, I don't know, any early lessons learned? And also just recognizing too that Medic has had some strategic changes over the last several years.
Yeah, actually, before I do that, I want to touch upon that values question. Maybe a way to
go ahead.
Maybe a way to frame it for you all is, I think we have all underestimated what those 10 blue links on Google actually do. Like, I think that like in some ways, like my mom has no idea how PageRank works, like literally has no idea. PageRank is how those links, like which are those links that show up and what order they show up when you go to google.com. But she does know that like, oh, the top link means something, the bottom link means something, and there are some dissenting opinions sort of in this list. And if we're going to this world of like, again, like systems that sound confident and they just give you one answer, you have to really ask yourself, like, where did that one answer come from? So like the maybe like two examples I like to think about here. There was just a paper joint between Princeton and UW, where they asked a bunch of these platform AI systems about some purchasing decision they wanted to make. And then they measured what the response was back from that. And then they changed the persona who was asking it. And what they found is that more often than not, the systems seem to be favoring sponsored results as opposed to what might actually be the thing you're looking for. And on top of that, these systems are also subtly profiling you. So if you're of higher socioeconomic status, they're giving you a different answer than if you're lower socioeconomic status. And so the question that like you would have never known that unless you're a highly suspicious person like I am, but like you have just never understood that's actually going on. Maybe another way to look at that is there was a paper last year, actually one of my favorite papers from last year, maybe more apropos to this community, is kidney donations. Kidney donations is a very complicated thing. It's not simply the order which people show up in line. There's a values judgment you're making in kidney donations. So a bunch of researchers, I want to say in Maryland, asked a whole bunch of the platforms, how would you donate this? Like, who would you allocate this kidney to? All the Western AIs, so Meta, Google, Anthropic, ChatGPT, answered one way. All the Eastern open source AIs answered a different way. And so like that was pretty stark of just like something in the training, something in the water is in those systems, not exactly evident, but they're making decisions in very different ways. And so like we all just need to be understood, like if we're using someone else's system, their incentive, their training data, whatever their worldview is encoded somewhere in that system. Like these systems are just really good at picking up the worldview of their creators. And so when I think about ownership in this space, like, and I acknowledge that this is a hard thing for us to do, but like we have to think about like how do we own every layer of this, or how do we influence every layer of this? How do we make sure our imprint is on every single layer of the systems that we're using? Because otherwise they might be doing things that don't align with what we're saying. So sorry, I forgot the actual question you asked.
No. That was a great diversion. Thank you. No, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about how some of these lessons are coming into Medic strategy and just even some of the changes you've had over the last years.
I mean, so for Medic, we think a lot about this augmentation versus automation debate. Like, unsurprisingly, we get funders all the time who are just like, well, are you going to get rid of CHWs? Or like, how do you vibe code the latest interface that someone might want to show up in the world? Or like, we get those questions every single day. And our answer is generally like, interesting, but not.
Can I stop you for 1 second? I want to make sure everybody knows what vibe code is here, actually.
So
thank you.
Vibe coding, for those of you who don't know, is like, actually my son vibe codes is kind of hilarious.
I'm about to take a class in vibe coding.
If you're all curious about my 10-year-old son, cute and stinky dot productions, like he's been vibe coding a whole series of video games. And what it just really means is he sits down with an AI, describes the video game he wants, and then the AI builds the video game, and then it'll be like, oh no, I wanted the dinosaur to be purple, and then it makes another version of it where the dinosaur's purple. And so vibe coding in some ways for my son is this creative expression, but for the rest of the industry is becoming the way that we write code. Like, you know, I think of myself as a pretty good engineer. I don't think I've written a line of code since November at this point, which in my industry is forever, effectively, because I just describe the code I want to one of these chat systems and it writes the code for me. And then I read it, I make sure it's kind of okay, and then we just go from there. So we're getting funders all the time who are asking us like, well, why do you have engineers anymore? Like, why don't you just like get rid of all your engineers and just let the CHWs vibe code it directly for themselves, kind of thing, which, you know, interesting. But to my point earlier of like, I think our job is to scale care, and is to scale like the love that people feel for their fellow human being. So what we've done instead is we've chose to lean into augmenting our team. So like we've gotten Claude licenses for the engineers on the Medic team, and they can just generate code faster. And so like we're not getting rid of them, we're just doing more with the resources that we have. Like pull reviews or pull requests from all the other community members. Like when someone else writes code and they want in the Medic code base, we can scan it a lot faster. We can integrate it a lot faster. We can deploy versions a lot faster. We can find bugs in production faster. Like we're not going to automate away our people, but we're going to instead figure out how to give us the time to really think about what human-centered means, as opposed to just like making us automatons in that system. So we've been thinking a lot about that as sort of like our path forward when it comes to this AI world. And then how do we help other organizations become stewards of the data they sit on? So like if you're not ready to be a AI forward organization, totally fine. Like, I want people to think about how to become AI ready organizations. Like, how do you organize yourselves so that when inevitably some version of AI shows up your door, you can actually use it in the way that you understand. It accelerates the work that you want to get done. And it's not just simply doing things willy-nilly across your ecosystem. And so I talk a lot to organizations, and Medic talks a lot to organizations about how to organize your data sets, how to document things correctly, how to just make things more discoverable by these AI systems so that they can help you understand what's truly going on in the world.
I feel like you need a checklist. Do you have that?
I mean, we have some version of an internal one that maybe we should think about releasing.
I'm going to ask you, I think this is something all of our organizations would benefit from, is an AI readiness, because I think many of us are using AI, but it feels like we're trying to play catch up, and we don't know what we don't know. And
and similarly to how like us and all our hopefully and organizations that surround Medic are sharing things that work, we also should be sharing all the different prompts that we're using, all the different ways that we're using AI inside our organizations, et cetera. Like, you know, for example, we've built some workflow management stuff inside Mozilla that we should just be telling the rest of the world that, like, the way I manage my calendar today is so fundamentally different than 3 months ago, for example.
I think we all could use help with that.
No, it's actually kind of great. Like, and so like, we should all just be sharing those type of things. Like, calendaring is just my personal thing because I hate it so much. But like, for all the different pain points in our organizations, like, how are we using AI to solve that? Like, one of these sessions should just be like 5-minute lightning talks of just like all the different things.
I was going to propose like a share day. Yeah, like share. What was it we did as kids? Like
show and tell.
Show and tell. That's what we need. We need like the Alliance show and tell.
But so we've also been going through like large organizational changes in Medic, because not necessarily because of this, but it's hard to say that's not coincident with a lot of this. Like, spinning off Medic Afia has been a really interesting exercise for us, because we're now setting up a local organization that's very different than the global organization. And honestly, the big models have been really useful for us to read all the lawyer documents and just understand like how we're actually going to make that work and explain it to the rest of our board in really simple terms that they can understand and get behind, like, kind of things. Like, we've moved to a co-executive, co-ED model inside of Medic, because it just turned out, like, especially in this world, this is more than a job that a single person can fit in their head. So we now have 2 amazing women that sort of like run Medic in a very joint way, but really one of their brains is really focused on technical, product, human centric. The other woman's brain is focused on operations and fundraising. But like, these are such 2 different worlds that having 2 people focus on it has been really helpful for us. And honestly, it's been a game changer within the organization, because like, now we can hold multiple things in our heads at the same time. So that's been actually kind of great to watch too.
You might get some questions on the break about that too, because I think that's a really intriguing idea. And I think a lot of us who've led organizations know that's a impossible set of multiple
and we
skills.
were resistant to having a co-ED model for a long time.
What got you there?
It turned out we had 2 amazing women who'd just been with the organization long enough that they were like the soul of it, that they were able to go do it. Like, we thought about doing a search for an co-ED model. We couldn't wrap our heads around pulling that off.
Yeah.
But for us, it just turned out we had that talent inside. We just were looking in the wrong place.
That's very cool. Okay, I am going to open it up for questions. Rafi, thank you. You've been so generous. We may have some questions online. Hopefully we'll have some questions in the room. Anyone? Yes, I'll start with Josh and then we'll go into the back.
Thanks so much for the great.
Wait, we have a microphone coming to you because we want to make sure the folks online can hear.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and please introduce yourself.
Josh Brass, I'm a physician and I'm global strategy.
Actually turn the microphone on, sorry. All right, we'll do it one more
How's
time.
that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Josh Brass. I'm a physician. I work for Global Strategies. We make clinical decision support applications.
Cool.
And my question is about the local road analogy. My experience is it's 99% local roads out there, but you can get good at solving the local road problem. Kind of, how did you decide, okay, we're going to set up shops in different areas versus focus on solving the local road problem that may apply to different settings?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we're thinking about on Medic Global is the local road problem. Like, instead, like, reframing how we spend our time to be like, we want to get down as far into the community as possible, but then also acknowledging that we're going to be pulled in 12 different directions once we get to like instead of being at 10,000 feet, being at 100 feet kind of thing. And so for us, like actually setting up those local organizations that can then better understand the different contexts, the different language needs, the different incentive plans and different incentive structures, I think for us was key. But really, it's also cultivating local talent, because like in the end, we want ownership to be there, not just the understanding of the problems. So like actually then being able to reframe part of Medic's job as not just building this technology, but really building the ecosystem that's going to support this technology and potentially bring other technologies to play too. Like, from the global standpoint, like I only see the world through the CHT, our community health toolkit. But like when you're actually on the ground, like, I spent a few weeks in Nairobi. I want to say it was last year, right before all the craziness happened. And I was just like, CHT is not the right answer for this problem. And so like, but we can't see that at the global level. But like, I'm hoping as we actually inspire more of that like developer network, developer community at a local level, they can see those things in a way that we just won't be able to.
I'm going to add a quick recommendation before we go to the next question. One of our members, Nithya Ramanathan of NextLeaf, wrote a really great article with colleagues in the Stanford Social Innovation Review called Scale That Lasts. And it talks about ownership. And I think it was one of the most read articles in SSIR last year, but talking about like it's a 6 or 7 step process around ownership, and really well matched with what Rafi's talking about here. Yes.
Nitya has a question. Nitya,
Okay,
do you
maybe we'll
want
go
to
to
ask
Nithya
your
and then
question?
we'll go to the back of the room. Sorry. Yes.
Krista, thank you for that. That was unplanned. Hello, Nithya Ramanathan here. I apologize I couldn't be there in person. I didn't want to pass on this persistent cold to all of you. So really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much. And Rafi, I wanted to actually just take you back to what you were talking about in terms of local community ownership, because it is something that we at NextLeaf think about continuously. It's something that we've heard from ministries from the very beginning, which is they would rather build their own code if it means that they can own it and locally host it and control it. And then with USAID shutting down, of course, that just brought that entire thing, kind of blew it all open, where ministries of health could point to this situation and say, see, this is why we want local control. And one of the things that we find with many peer organizations is there's this sort of approach of, well, we can build it better for you. So, it's better to do SaaS, it's better to do it in the cloud, et cetera. And I see that, but we've actually at NextLeaf decided to go the approach of local hosting and supporting that in order to really honor data ownership, data sovereignty. So my question is, thank you for letting me share that context, but my question is just how are you thinking about, and at Medic and your various hats, how are you thinking about local hosting and honoring kind of country ownership, some of the local legislation when the infrastructure hasn't quite caught up yet? Yeah, would love your thoughts on how you're approaching that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So I write a newsletter that's called Owners Not Renters. And it's like specifically around what you just mentioned, which is like, I truly believe we need to get to a world where like we own our technology and we're not beholden and are renting our technology. Now,
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily mean local hosting, but that's one way that you could go do it. Because like, if I draw on my time, and I apologize for my politics for a second, if I draw on my time at the DNC, one of the reasons I was brought into the DNC was the Russians hacked the DNC's email system. And the way they were able to do it was locally hosted by the DNC. And the DNC didn't have the talent needed in order to secure it properly. So like literally one of the first things I did was like, hey, Microsoft, I need you to own this problem, not me. But being able to make a call on a case-by-case basis is what it means for me to be an owner. It was just like, I know that like in this particular thing, I don't have the capability to go do it. So I will then outsource that. Like, I'm not going to fix the plumbing in my house. Like, I could do it. I don't think you want me to. But I'll just outsource that to someone else. Similarly, like when it comes to like cloud hosting, like you just need to make a call of just like, do I have the talent? Am I willing to develop the talent? And if not, maybe that's the one thing we're going to figure out how like AWS knows how to secure themselves from a DDoS attack from a foreign actor. Like we're just going to let them go do it for me. So being able to like actually split up a problem into more fine-grained pieces than just my application, I think is what we need to learn to do. And then we can start making calls on a case by case basis.
Great. I know we have a question in the back. 2 questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Diane Dodge. I'm with the TIBA Foundation. And I just want to give you an example because we work with Medic. You probably haven't even heard about it, but this is what the ecosystem is like. We help facilitate a collaborative of 14 different counties, reproductive health leaders. And we found out, we were talking about the Ichis app that's happening in Kenya. And it's all about cervical cancer, this collaborative in breast cancer. And we asked to have Medic come and show us while they were developing, what questions are you putting in there for the health workers? How are you doing it? And they were very interested, showed up, wanted to get feedback on how it's happening. And then the big thing also is helping the users actually use it. And that is part of ownership too. The Ministry of Health is implementing it, but they are talking to partners across the country. How do you help train the community health workers in this? How do you get the feedback back from them to make these changes? So it's happening out there.
No, I really appreciate that. And in when I visited last, it was also seeing that different counties wanted different dashboards. Like different counties just want different, like the national people want one view, everyone else wants a different view. So like being able to push control down as far as we could is sort of like my goal. And so I'm glad that worked out with the team of just like wanting to actually learn, because we think of it also as it's a socio-technical problem, right? It's not just code. Like it's how is code used? How is code lived with? Is sort of like the questions that we have to grapple with.
Yeah, thank you.
I think there's another question back there too.
Hi, thanks so much. Natalie Myers with Resurge International. We're a global surgery nonprofit organization helping to build capacity and education around the surgical space. So thank you so much for your talk. I actually have a bit of an existential question for you, given all of your expertise and all of your experience. But I'm just wondering, we hear so much in global health and international development of all the potential for leapfrogging with technologies. So I would love to hear from you if you could predict for us, what will we have done right in the West if we do end up actually using these technologies to leapfrog, and what will we have done wrong if we see that equity gap actually expand because of AI?
I mean, the wrong, I think you have your finger exactly on what we would have done wrong, is like that equity gap would have expanded. Like, I think that like, if we're solely I think the way that these systems are usually thought about in the world is that they will enable those who are already well off to get even further well off in the grand scheme of things. Like they usually have more access. It's usually their data that's been trained in the systems. Like, there was sadly a lot of evidence, even just last year, that a lot of these systems weren't trained on women's health. They're only trained on men's health, like that kind of stuff. And so like, we could potentially see more of that. For my mind, I want to live in a Star Trek like universe where everything is great. And like, I think the way that we sort of get there is like, we need to have better ownership across the board on how these technologies are used and owned and deployed and developed, so we can make sure that individuals' voices are actually showing up in all the different places. So for me, success really looks like, if you were to graph the intervention across the entire socioeconomic, entire race-based, entire gender-based spectrum, that's like a uniform lift. I worry that we're really not going in that direction right now, like really not going in that direction. Like we're really going into a world of like benefiting the few at the cost of the others. And so like that's the metric I want to look for. It's like how getting to that point. And I think it comes down to like education on all of us on how to use these systems. We need more people developing these systems. Right now, the way these systems are developed is it takes tens of billions of dollars in order to pull it off. Like you just saw how much money Sam Altman, Dario, et cetera, are raising out there in the world, but it doesn't have to be that way. Like, I think like for me, my wife's a computer scientist, so I can rag on computer scientists all day long. Like, I think a lot of it is that like we haven't set up incentive structures for academics to take risks and to explore the space better. And so like we need to figure out who are the true risk takers, who could be the true risk takers, and let them explore that space to understand what the real opportunities are. We might be in, what I call like a local maxima of just like we found a solution that kind of works, so we're just going to run with it. But that doesn't mean we found the right solution to pull it all off. I don't know if I answered your question and just ranted, but I think about the same things.
Lots to think about. Other questions? Yes.
So I can't help myself. You asked the question but didn't answer it. Are we screwed?
I'm actually a very optimistic person. And so like actually my podcast, every middle-aged white dude has a podcast. My podcast was called Technically Optimistic because I actually really believe having conversations like this end up to move the world in a better direction. So like one of the things I found when doing my podcast is that when I spoke to, let's call it lay people, everyday people around this technology, they usually end up being like, I never thought about that way. We have to do something. Like, so I think it all actually starts with conversations and education. So if we're all more aware, then when a big platform company asks to deploy their technology inside your organization, you can have a conversation to push back because you realize that power is on your side. When your children want to go and work on these type of technologies, we can direct them in the right ways that they should go do it. When we're raising our society, we can make those choices. So I'm actually an optimistic person, but I think it doesn't come for free. Like, I think if we all just sit around and do nothing and assume that it's all inevitable, then it will be inevitable. Like it'll just be like, survivor's bias effectively. And so we actually have to do something, but it starts with these type of conversations.
Which is why we're having this here today. You have a question?
Hi, everyone, and thanks for this talk. It's so interesting. I'm Navita Jain. I work at AVAC, and I'm the partnership team lead at the organization. And AVAC really focuses on advocacy, particularly around equitable access to new technologies for HIV prevention, but also really supporting advocacy networks and community civil society organizations to be partners in all the work that we're doing for HIV prevention. And that kind of leads into my question of, we talk about making sure that we have community and local leadership, but oftentimes when engaging with ministries of health or community health workers, it doesn't include advocates or civil society organizations, which often are bringing, community-led and community-monitored data that is really highlighting the gaps that we see in really getting to real equitable access and engagement with key populations. Our systems are often built that don't really support that. My question to you is, how do we expand that definition of local leadership to make sure those communities are also included? And it's not just ministries of health or healthcare workers, and we're really ensuring that some of the biggest gaps, especially with the funding cuts recently, are actually ensuring access to key population groups and other groups that are very quickly being left behind.
It's a great question. In a previous administration, when I used to speak to Congress about this, I would say things like, the only way a system like this works is a three-legged stool. Like you need government, you need commercial entities, and you need civil society, and they need to be kind of counterbalanced with each other. We are very much not in that world right now. Like I acknowledge that we're very much in the companies and everyone else kind of situation. So like we do need to figure that out. And I think a lot of it just comes down to like, figuring out, not just that makes it sound like it's super easy to do, but like figuring out what are the right forums to have these conversations. Because again, in my optimistic view of the world, I actually think people want to hear these other voices. It's like when they're left to their own echo chambers, they just do whatever they want to go do. But like, I actually do believe that a lot of these people want to hear what an alternative way is, what other voices really are, because we need those voices to be part of how that system is developed. So like, I would love to see more forums. I would love to see more meeting and convening points. I'd love to see more just like conversations. There was just a conversation in San Francisco, I want to say last week, on the future of work, which was just that intersection of technology, government, policy folks, and community, all just talking about the issues. And the number of Substacks I saw come out of that conference was great. Like that's a measure of like that conversation may have started something, but they won't finish it. They'll start it. And so I think we need to find more of these convening points because And we have to figure out a way to do it in a grassroots way because like no one's going to come and save us. Like we save ourselves in this moment. And so we need to figure that out.
I'm going to actually end with a few last questions for you in two different directions. And I love that you highlighted technically optimistic, your podcast, because that is kind of where I want to end. With the folks who feel like AI and technology is moving really fast and it's hard to keep up, what advice do you have? I'll say for all of us, because I think we all feel that many times. Yeah. Like what should we be doing for the next step to, to be prepared, to be educated, to be engaged in these conversations?
Yeah. I mean, I actually really like your idea of show and tell, but like, I really think it starts with just like being curious.
Yeah.
Like, I think that like, you can't just ostrich your point. Is ostrich the one that puts their head in the ground?
Yes,
You can't just
yes, yes.
ostrich yourself at this moment. Like things are moving too fast.
Yeah.
And so I feel that like people who have, like, you can tell who are the people who have tinkered with it and the people who haven't.
Okay.
And I think that like, you have to at least be tinkering with it. And like, I actually find no problem with going and tinkering with a ChatGPT or a Claude, et cetera. Just understand what you're getting into. Like maybe read one or two of my pieces before you go do it, just to like put yourself in the right frame of mind. But you have to be better educated on like what is actually capable of. I'm preparing for a Mozilla board meeting in 2 weeks where I plan to blow the board's mind away of just like, I don't think I've touched a browser in like 2 weeks. And so like just being able to like explain to them that like, the world is really changing, but you just gotta like, I'm hoping that isn't it causes them to be like, oh, I need to really think about this and I'll play with it for a while and see what the hubbub is about. So I think it starts there of just like, you just gotta tinker with it. And then like, talk to your kids, see how they're cheating on their tests, talk to your friend down the street and how they're organizing something and just like see what those are. I think we just have to have a conversation. That's where I'd start.
That's great advice, by the way, is asking your kids how they're using AI. And for those of you who are teaching like me, how our students are using it. Because like in some ways great, in other ways like quite concerning.
I'll
Yeah.
just one quick anecdote of
Please,
this. So
yeah.
again, my wife, amazing woman, way smarter than I am. She is one of the foremost reinforcement learners in the world, is a subsect of AI. And she teaches what's currently the second largest class at Stanford because everyone wants to learn AI. And the way grading now, what she's done for grading, which I found super interesting, is homeworks are basically graded at 0%. So she'll give you homework, but she just assumes you're going to run it through ChatGPT and you're going to cheat. So 0% on homework. Midterm and final are proctored exams, closed book. And then you have to show up once a week to a recitation, 3-on-1, 3 students to 1 TA, and do whiteboard problems. And so it's 15 minutes. Like it doesn't matter how well or badly you can't flunk it, but it's mostly attendance based. So like just show up and start doing whiteboard problems on a whiteboard with 2 other students to demonstrate you understand the stuff. So that's how higher education is reacting to it because of it.
Yeah. I also want to pick up your point about being curious, because I think one of the things I love about our community with the Alliance is how curious all of you are too. So I feel like we're already like doing the right thing, which I'm happy to say. And I think the last question for you too is like, what are you really optimistic about in global health and the use of AI or other technologies?
I actually do think that this is a path, if done correctly, for us to still have the kind of impact we want on potentially less dollars. So like, I think that like this actually is a way for us to like augment the work that we're doing, not replace it. Because I think that ends up in that like replacing it is a short-term win that's going to cause us long-term pain. But augmenting us might be short-term slower for long-term betterment. So I really am optimistic that like if we can figure out how to do it right, if we're going to really understand what ownership means, if we can get local communities involved, so it's not just 7 CEOs in San Francisco dictating how this all works, I actually do think we'll get into a better place because of it.
That's great. And the last thing I'll just end with by saying is we were just chatting briefly earlier about Pope Leo's new encyclical. I'm not going to ask you to explain it, but what I do want to just point out is that many of his arguments about putting power back in the hands of people, I wonder if he's read your stuff, because I would just want to thank you both for coming to speak with us today, but also for the writing and the conversation starting that you are doing. It's so valuable to the community. So thank you. A very warm welcome. Thank you. Yes, I'm just going to make a quick announcement. We're going to be taking a short break now, about 15 minutes. Rafi, I think you'll be here. Yeah, if you have a few specific questions. If you don't need a break, please go meet someone new you haven't met before. And yeah, and share like what's something surprising from your last year. And thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the break. And I know we've gotten a lot of feedback that we just never have enough time for networking and conversation starting. So I'm glad that you all had the opportunity to do that. I'm going to be very quick here, but I'm very excited to introduce the next session for us today. We just had a very interesting conversation around AI deployment, friction, partnerships. And now I think we want to really think about markets, right? And how all of the work that we're doing eventually transcends into the markets. And it is very important that we sort of be able to understand our lessons learned, our failures, but also our successes. So with that, I am very delighted to introduce Jessie Katz, who is the founder and CEO of the Partnerships Lab. And she is going to help us facilitate a wonderful conversation around moving from market shaping to market building. Jessie, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, today and in these day and age, time is our most precious currency. So we really appreciate you deciding to show up today and be here and spend your time with us. And thank you to the Bay Area Global Health Alliance for convening this really important dialogue from market shaping to this new term that we're trying to introduce, market building, and what the next generation of health markets should actually look like. Now, for those of you who are a little bit newer to the market shaping space, let me give you a little bit of a definition and context, and then I'll invite my panelists who know a lot more about this subject than I to the stage, and we'll have a really interesting dialogue. So in terms of the definition of market shaping, we use this term to describe the use of financial, policy, regulatory tools that can solve for market uncertainties, address market failures in a way that allows for increased access to medicines, diagnostics, vaccines, health innovations, with a particular focus in low and middle income countries. And over the past 2 decades, really, market shaping has had a tremendous impact through tools like pooled procurement, demand generation, voluntary licensing, advanced market commitments. I can go on and on. There's many different shaping strategies that can be customized to the specific situation and need of the community, of the product, so on and so forth. And this is really done to reduce uncertainty, lower prices, and increase uptake of an innovation. And there has been tremendous success and impact through market shaping to date. In HIV alone, for example, HIV is the case study we typically point to most in terms of scale and impact of market shaping success. So, for example, in HIV, in the early 2000s, treatment for HIV per person per year was $10,000. Today, it's under 40. So that shows the scale and the scope of these types of strategies. But as we know, the environment is shifting. So it's really important that we think about different types of market shaping strategies and solutions that we can bring to bear to meet the market where we are. So as you all know, COVID really exposed major vulnerabilities and inequities in the system. So we saw vaccine inequity, manufacturing being concentrated amongst very few manufacturers, fragile supply chains, and also dependence on externally financed systems. And now we have new challenges. We have constrained financing environment, reductions in traditional ODA, and this is really creating new urgency that we haven't seen before. So really thinking about an emphasis on sustainability, resilience, country ownership, and long-term market viability. But at the same time, the market itself is shifting, right? So historically, market shaping was largely a conversation between governments, manufacturers, and in some instances, multilaterals and development actors. But it was often focused on reducing price for vertically funded products. And these products were typically purchased through centralized procurement systems. But as we look ahead to the future, we have a much more complex and dynamic environment that we have to operate in. So we're seeing an increased burden of NCDs, a growing middle income population, increased private sector participation, direct to consumer health models. We have things like local manufacturing being prioritized. And these non-traditional health actors need to be a part of the solution. And they're beginning to shape how health products and services are financed, distributed, demanded, and consumed. And this all means that we're going to need new incentives to align on, new mechanisms for partnership and collaboration, and new access, financing, and market shaping strategies in order to meet the moment where we are. And many of us last week, sorry, my glasses keep falling down, were at the World Health Assembly. And this point was really reinforced, that there's growing recognition that the future of global health will depend less on shaping markets for individual products and more on building integrated, resilient, and sustainable systems. So today, that is our challenge, to explore what this next generation of market shaping should look like based on where we are today, and what new models, partnerships, financing approaches we can implement in order to move forward and meet the moment where we are. So my challenge to you all and to the panelists who will be joining us is to really think about this. How do we push this conversation forward and not revert to historical market shaping approaches? How do we bring new ideas, provocative thoughts to the table and really say openly what we might not have said enough before? So without further ado, Joanna, would you like to join me up here? And we have our panelists as well. Over here, I think is perfect. And I'm going to turn this a little bit so I can see the screen. Can you see me if I sit like this? Okay, amazing. All right, so I'm very excited to introduce the panelists we have here today with us. Joanna, I'll start with you and then we'll go to those virtually. Please just introduce your name, organization, and give us a few words on the role that your organization plays in the market shaping dynamic.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, no.
Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here today, and thank you for the invitation. I'm Joanna Sickler. I'm the Vice President of Health Policy and External Affairs for Roche Diagnostics. My role covers all markets, all types of markets around the world. But I think related to global health, we are the primary supplier of HIV viral load testing throughout Africa and have built most of the diagnostics infrastructure around that that exists today. So going through these transitions that are happening, they're very significant for us in terms of thinking about how we will be working going forward to ensure delivery of the diagnostics that are in place. But I think more importantly, opportunities to expand access to diagnostics.
Excellent. Thank you, Joanna. Let's go to our virtual participants. Jay, we'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me well.
Yes.
Thanks. Thanks again for inviting me, and sorry I couldn't be there in person. So I'm Jay. I lead the Independent Access to Medicine Foundation. We've been for about 20 years using research that we uniquely develop to create evidence to influence the actions by some of the largest pharmaceutical companies on access to care in low and middle income countries. And our work is mainly in terms of market shaping. We study different market shaping efforts and its effect on access. We look at the responses that the industry, or sort of the, how does industry actually respond to the different market shaping mechanisms that have been in place and what's happening in the future. And when we identify practices that are working and where we see the patient reach and the scale numbers coming forward, we try to promote those practices so that we can sort of promote more scale up of some of these practices. Personally, a lot of organizations also come to us for data and advice on market shaping activities. So that's basically how we work in the market shaping sphere.
Thank you so much, Jay. Yasmin.
Good morning, or I guess good afternoon. Again, thank you for inviting me. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Okay. My name is Yasmin Chandani, and I lead the InSupply Health team. InSupply Health is an East African health advisory firm. We focus on, we're relatively young, especially compared to the Access to Medicine Foundation and some of the other panelists, but we started out sort of working on resilient supply chains. We work very closely with governments in Kenya and Tanzania, and now Ethiopia and Uganda, and are relatively new to the market shaping space. But what we come from the perspective of sort of helping governments to implement some of their ambitions around building broader access to care in some of these markets across public and private sector. And I think what we try and do is bring the perspective of the client, the human-centered aspect. So when you are trying to expand access, how do you, beyond a product or even, integrated resilient systems are really the gold standard, but even within those, access and equity can be lost. So how do you bring in the human-centered perspective and make sure that as you design and try and shape and build broader access, that those elements are not lost? So that's a little bit about what we do.
Excellent. Thank you, Yasmin. And we're excited for you to provide that perspective today. Marianne, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jessie. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with everyone. I'm Mariana Tiebet. I'm CEO of Vital Strategies. We are a global public health organization that works with governments and civil society in over 50 countries across the globe, as you can see behind me, to help build, what I've started to call next generation public health systems. We come to market shaping from at least two different directions. One, we focus on unmet need, unmet health needs. And in today's world, a lot of that is non-communicable diseases. So, the chronic diseases like diabetes, hypertension, cancer. We know so much of those diseases are driven by factors outside of the health system. They're driven by the conditions in which we live and work and play. So whether it's air pollution, whether it is tobacco exposure, whether it is sugary beverages. And so we work with governments to change the environment that people are living in through long-term policy change. So that's, one way in which we want to create, or we work to create, markets that support health in people's everyday life. In the second instance, and I think, Jessie, you spoke to it a little bit around in the global health environment that's existing right now, really we are seeing and we are wanting to see an even faster shift to national governments in terms of strengthening their ability, capability, and institutions to better shape markets. And so the work we do with national governments supports the data infrastructure in which they are able to understand the health needs of their citizens. But also in today's world, and I just can't wait to get into the conversation, where, data is the new currency. Data is, the fuel on which markets are running right now. How do we make sure that governments have the best data for health so that they can make the right decisions?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marianne. And we'll actually stay with you and Jay, as you were two important co-authors of a recent publication focused on market shaping, where you explored some of the historical examples, best practices, learnings perhaps even some unintended consequences of market shaping strategies that have been implemented. So in order to ground everyone in that same kind of foundational understanding of what has happened in the past, I would love for you to provide 2 minutes on key highlights, takeaways, things that you found really interesting about this discovery, things you would advise us to bring with us as we paint this future market shaping approach, things that we might forego and leave in the past. Anything you'd like to share, Marianne, and then Jay, I'll come to you if there's anything
Sure.
else.
And all in 2 minutes. So I'll put the link of the paper in the chat. But as I was rereading it, and we started this work in 2023, which seems like a century ago, honestly. But I reread it with the eye of, what's endured versus what's been upended. As you mentioned, we try to bring forth 4 cases of market shaping, really focused on therapeutics and vaccines, HIV, TB, hepatitis C, malaria, Ebola, which is obviously very relevant now. Through different types of mechanisms to improve market dynamics. In this audience, I don't need to belabor the point around, how these mechanisms were created to align supply and demand, to ensure uptake, to reduce uncertainty, whether that's by bringing more data and research, into the equation, or insurance mechanisms, reducing transaction cost, shifting and sharing risk. And I want to come back to the point Rafi made around how in the AI space, we need to create more incentives for risk taking, because that is what, kind of the paper at its heart was about, how to reduce or shift or share risk. That also speaks to one of the limitations of the paper, because it did focus on pharmaceuticals. We didn't talk about devices, we didn't talk about diagnostics, we didn't talk about tech-enabled or AI-enabled solutions. And I think that's where the world, is, right now. But what jumped out at me was none of the market shaping examples would have been possible without flexible mission-driven financing and sweat equity. And so I think that's something that is still needed. That's something that whose supply is more uncertain right now. But that ability of flexible mission-driven financing, was key. The second thing, that jumped out of me, it reminded me of kind of the original impetus, for the big global financing institutions, Gavi and Global Fund, originally kind of set out, to better align the markets through pooled procurement mechanisms, advanced purchase agreements, et cetera. And I do think reminding ourselves of that fact, especially at a time where there are so many conversations about global health architecture and global health refinancing reform, is important. But the third point I want to make, and we actually changed the title of this talk from market shaping to market building, is I think the disruption that has come to the kind of donor-driven global health ecosystem is also coming for the commercial driven, kind of global health ecosystem. Those, kind of old paradigms, old norms that we all operated under, they're being blown up. The solutions are changing. There are new market players, new types of entrants into the market, new rules, a new pace. And I think for me, one of the most important trends for us to think about is the direct to consumer, trend, and how when consumers don't have good information, full information, markets are not going to work. And, in the earlier conversation, we talked about the risk of disparities and inequities. And I think, that's a critical one. But just to end, I thought about what are the first principles, that this paper is reminding us of. And for me, it was about how do we build the foundations for markets to work? It's not about tinkering at the edges and building scaffolding, because if those original structures fall down, the scaffolding collapses as well. So how do we build those foundations that allow a diversity, you know, of mechanisms to proliferate? And again, thinking that at least in this moment of time, it seems that a lot of the solutions are in the digital, you know, kind of AI space. One of the things we did as an organization, and that's Vital Strategies, is we wanted to kind of reorient the conversation and the foundations. And so somebody mentioned WHA. We released a new report, and I'll do a little plug for it here. Foundations and Futures, Reimagining Public Health in the AI Era, where we spoke to the need to invest in the critical national foundational infrastructure that would allow the right types of public health impact, you know, in this new AI era. And then my last point, Rafi talked about the three legs of the stool, commercial, government, and civil society. One of the things we found out also at WHA is there's not only information asymmetry at the consumer level, also at the government level. And so how do we create mechanisms for governments to learn from each other as they are negotiating with commercial entrants, you know, into this new market? And there's a lot of appetite, you know, for that. So each government does not have to reinvent the wheel as they are building, you know, their own national institutions and policies and practices to better shape markets. I know that was over 2 minutes, so thank you.
That's okay. I'll let you have that. Thank you, Marianne. So what I'm hearing, just to summarize, is flexible mission-driven financing, new actors at the table, including consumers, the role of pooled procurement organizations like Agavi, like a global fund. What does it mean if those don't exist? How do we effectively share risk? And what is the role of bringing some of these additional innovations beyond pharmaceutical products, beyond vaccines, beyond diagnostics to the table as we think about our market shaping approach? Because oftentimes innovators who are producing tech innovations are left out of these market shaping conversations, and those are equally important to consider. Jay, is there anything you wanted to add before we move forward?
Maybe a couple of things there. I think, you know, the idea of market shaping initially was really centered on, you know, reducing the prices. It's more like considered as price slashing or just getting a better deal for a longest time. And it sort of inspired this paper because we wanted to lay out as a group, you know, and it came out of a panel discussion that we had at one of the CUGH meetings. We want to lay out as a group, you know, what are the different types of market shaping mechanisms? How do they work? What have they worked on? And where are the major gaps as we're shaping towards the future market shaping areas itself? So I think, and happy to go into examples of what's emerging coming out of the existing market shaping areas in a bit. But I think just from our data, we've definitely highlighted areas where access is extremely fragmented. We've got certain therapeutic areas where we have very, very few producers making vital products. For example, not enough innovative products are actually designed with communities in low and middle income countries in mind, or even co-designed, right? And that's changing to some degree, but it's just not yet at the level where enough communities have the right medicines even designed for them, let alone available. And we all make the assumption that all the medicines and products are assumed to be available just because they're generic, but they're actually not available in countries for communities itself. So, and a lot of market shaping activities has been centered on a few disease areas that I think has done tremendous things in progress. But there's a whole lot of products and systems that actually need shaping. And patients and communities need a whole host of other things beyond medicines, as Marianne also mentioned there. In our data, we've also shown that patients' assistance programs has really been driving some of the NCD activities. When you think of just the collective nature of the diabetes care the companies active in type 1 diabetes. When you look at the programmatic interventions for children, only 1% of children are actually being reached by these very, very solid, good programs, but only 1% of children, with type 1 diabetes are even being reached by this, and many of them age out of the assistance program, which are primarily donations, and then they're left to figure out where to get the medicines in a general marketplace. So, and you've got many of these examples across a number of NCDs. So I think the main idea that we wanted to get across is the next generation market shaping initiatives has to focus, has to move from dropping the unit cost of a drug only to some sort of a multidimensional framework that builds that local healthcare workforce data and regulatory infrastructure alongside each other. A lot of that can be AI enabled in order to make sure that the aggregation of demand, aggregation of data, for example, in building registries, can actually be done in a more efficient way. And ideally, you're looking at sustainable market structures that are going to be moving away from a top-down donor purchasing model towards interventions that actually co-design with communities and finance using different mechanisms. I'm happy to go into the different mechanisms that we're exploring right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Jay. And I think you really nicely segued us into the next discussion and shared some early thoughts. But I think what's really important for us to do before we dive into designing what the future looks like is to acknowledge what are some of the principles that historically governed market shaping that no longer stand today. So Jay, you mentioned that we should be leading with a North Star of reduction of price. Maybe that's no longer important. Marianne, you mentioned new actors need to be at the table. This isn't just a government manufacturer community kind of angle. We need to think about what other stakeholders from a non-traditional standpoint need to be involved. So Yasmin, I'd like to go to you to share any additional perspectives on what assumptions about market shaping are you leaving in the past?
Thank you. And I think it's not necessarily different from what's been said before. I mean, I really think emphasizing Rafi's point about the ecosystem is something that we have seen that's really important from our work. And I think this covers what Jay and we were just talking about, Marianne were just talking about. We, from our work, I'll just give an example of, and it's an example of some work we've been doing with Ministry of Health and private sector with family planning and trying to expand. I think there's the government's goal was to build a total market approach for family planning, unburden the public sector a little bit and acknowledge that Kenya, as it becomes more middle income, has women who are seeking discretion, convenience, access through other channels. And, before this, you essentially had the free public sector and you had the high-end private sector where, $100 to see a specialist provider. And there's, what we call that middle private sector that is really important to reach and meet many women where they are. But that sector wasn't serving women when it comes to family planning. And so I think some of the work we've done has been to try and understand how do you help government and that private sector expand quality, expand access, build a reputation where for decades women don't. In Kenya, the pharmacy is the first stop shop for pretty much every Kenyan when it comes to for anything, even for me, right? Except when it comes to reproductive health, family planning. And that's because there's been such a heavy, free, subsidized source of product through public sector. And so there's not a lot of trust in that, in community pharmacies, retail pharmacies, and even the smaller private clinics, which are more affordable for this growing middle class. They don't trust that these providers can meet their reproductive health needs. And so one of the challenges we've been working with, along with so many other stakeholders, is how do you build that trust? And how do you incentivize a pharmacist who, is a business person? Now, how do you help them expand their definition of what the pharmacy sector is capable of if they want it? And of course, there's many segments within, we have 7,500 registered pharmacies. Not all of them want to actually provide services, but some do. And so I think that ecosystem, acknowledging the importance of the ecosystem and how it needs to evolve, and what, the new players that need to be in the ecosystem is really important. But another thing I think we found is that the operational aspect of that ecosystem doesn't work right now. Distributors and wholesalers they're not equipped, to, for example, if you look at family planning products, when we talk about the incentives, even beyond the financial incentives, they're not getting signals on this from the pharmacies and the clients. So they're not stocking. So even as you try and expand some of the access points, there are supply chain challenges in there. So I think there's a really important aspect of building operations, acknowledging that there needs to be new players, and there are new players, but even the existing players will need to evolve to serve the needs of some of these clients a little bit better. And we do look at it, while it may be a product focus sometimes, it is trying to understand and working with pharmacies to say, these are women who may come in, for family planning, but they're the primary shoppers in their household for health. They're probably going to come in and buy other things. So look at them as your customers and try and build them, try and understand what their global needs are, not just a one product need. So I think those are some of the trends we see. And then also trying to work with government. The big gap, I think my colleagues have already talked about it, is the lack of the asynchronous data, right? Governments don't have enough data. Pharmacies don't understand what their suppliers have in stock. Like, there's just not enough data to understand how do you really help shape and build this ecosystem in a way that does serve women or whoever you're trying to serve better. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done, and it is being done. But those are, just to add to what has been said, those are some of the practical aspects that we see.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So getting medicine, diagnostic, vaccine to the tarmac isn't enough. What is the ecosystem of players beyond that need to be activated in order for the market shaping solution to actually be successful? And how do we start thinking about whole patient care, market shaping for integrated systems instead of vertical silos? Joanna, I'd like to come to you with the same question. What are some of the principles that you've historically used or thought of from a market shaping perspective that are changing or evolving today that might stay in the past?
Yeah, thanks so much. And I agree with everything that has been said by my fellow panelists. I think one thing I will say is I will actually take diagnostics off of the tarmac where you just put it, because as somebody who has been very involved in market shaping and specifically has worked on many of the deals that brought down the prices of HIV medicines when I worked for the Clinton Health Access Initiative, I think that these efforts have been incredible. I think the paper that my fellow panelists wrote did a really great job of laying it out. And I think those efforts are critical and need to continue. But they're one piece of the puzzle. And I think that's what everybody now recognizes. It's not the full picture. And I think as we go forward, we really need to move beyond thinking about market shaping around lowering the cost of a medicine or vaccine, which has already been said, to, I think it's more about health system shaping and an outcomes-based approach. So specifically, I mean, some of the issues that we were seeing, and this is before the last 18 months. So I want to be clear that like these things were going on before the disruptions are. It's amazing now that people have access to HIV medicines, but they're also dying of preventable illnesses like cervical cancer, different things, and we are unable to deliver the services to them that could prevent those things because of the way the siloed infrastructure is set up. So we really need to start moving towards a patient-based approach, bringing in different services. And I think that's a place where there's many things that come into play here, but because my expertise is in diagnostics, this has been a key challenge because many, I would say, of the market shaping techniques that were incredibly effective for medicines and vaccines, frankly, don't work well for diagnostics unless if you're talking about a rapid antigen test, yes, I think that can work. But when we start talking about more complex diagnostics, when we work in high income countries, something we talk a lot about is that we're 50% service and 50% product. And the market shaping approaches that have been used treat us as 100% product. And so what that's going to mean is you're getting some really bad service and you're not getting the diagnostics delivery you need. And so I do think starting to really think about how do we approach patients, healthcare systems, ecosystems. And I would imagine also many of the tools that we're talking about here around technology and AI would also maybe have some of the similar challenges that we've had in diagnostics, that you are going to need certain on the ground capacity. So I think starting to think more holistically about how we take forward the things that have worked, but recognize that there's a new challenge now that we have to tackle.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we've acknowledged some of the challenges and some of what's changing. I want to move us to the exciting part of the dialogue. What's emerging? What are some of the really interesting new models for market shaping that we can point to replicate, to scale, to further interrogate? And I think that one of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of these innovations, these interesting models, are coming from places where traditional boundaries are blurred. So between the public and the private sector, between global and local, between health and non-health actors. And it's where these kind of tensions, or what Rafi said, points of friction, where some of this innovation is coming. So I want to go first to Yasmin, who will provide the country perspective. Where are you seeing exciting emerging models coming from your work on the ground? And what can we learn from those examples?
So I think one example, I'm a big, for anyone who has talked to me, I'm a big believer in the power of data as a way of driving change in the system. And, whether data alone will not solve it. Everyone needs to use the data, but I think you need to start from a premise of having enough data, the right data, and having the right people have access to the right data. One of the things in partnership with the Ministry of Health and the Gates Foundation have been trying to understand is how do you, from a very respectful local perspective, create a whole market sort of data picture. For example, we have two sides to the work we do. So we work in the public sector with the ministry to strengthen family planning supply chains and have used AI-enabled tools for forecasting supply planning. We have a really good picture of that data because someone invested in that information system, and that data is relatively strong, good quality, available, visible, and used. Because not only was the data system invested in, people have invested in the process, and people know how to use and digest that data. In our work with the with the pharmacy sector and private clinics, there's no data that is available to that ecosystem. And so one of the things we've been trying to understand is what would incentivize pharmacies to actually report some of their data. How do you build a data system for the private sector when they worry about things like the tax authority? They may not want to share all that data with everyone. How do you respect data protection? And what is the minimum amount of data that will keep the Ministry of Health satisfied that they're getting enough and will not disrupt pharmacy workflows? And so I think that might be a really interesting, we're actually right in the middle of it now. So I can't necessarily say that I haven't seen an example where this has easily been solved, but I do think things like that might be the next frontier for us, because as we talk about these blurred lines and trying to understand how do you make space in this ecosystem for the necessarily relevant expanded group of players, we need to understand the roles and the impact that everyone is bringing to the table. And you can't really do that without data. And so to some extent, you do need this full view of of data from the ecosystem. And I think it's exciting to try and build that in a way that is a co-creative process with all the partners. So I would say that's a space to look at, because I think if you do get the right data and the right people have access to it, and they're at the table together talking about how to use it, that could really help shape this in a very interesting way. One of, just as an example, one of the things that beyond trying to track what is the profile of women that are coming into these pharmacies? Are they new clients? Are they revisit clients? Because that allows you to then understand, is it because women want to be initiated in a clinic, get their refill in a pharmacy? There's all sorts of things that you can understand from that. But the other piece we're seeing, and I think this speaks to the financial piece, is the price points. And, without understanding price sensitivity, you can't really help meet the different segments of women with the private sector, because we're coming from a place where the private sector existed for the very wealthy. And now what we're trying to do is make space for middle-class women who have different affordability characteristics. And we don't know what those are. And so I think it is really important to have data in a way that allows government and the private sector to respond to some of those needs.
Excellent. Thank you. And Joanna, you have a slightly different perspective, of course, coming from a different sector, and you have evolved your market shaping approach pretty significantly from the start to where it is now. And I'm curious if you can share that story with us, how it kind of evolved, but also what were the critical success factors that were required in order to enable that evolution?
Yeah, it's very nice to call them critical success factors versus not working. So, I mean, I think for us, this has definitely been a journey as an organization. I mean, a couple of the things that I would highlight is our focus on scalability. I think that what we have learned over the years is, like, you can come in with resources and make anything happen on a small scale. But the question is that actually scalable for broad impact? And we learned the hard way many times that as the private sector coming in and putting a lot of resources behind a pilot project did not result in any sort of scalability. And as a result, we don't do that anymore. Now how we really try to focus is, if we're going to work on a pilot, is to, from the beginning, have the right partners at the table in a coalition. So thinking about the Ministry of Health, thinking about, key implementing partners, thinking about civil society, and also having some roadmap for where the funding will come from for scalability. Now, that still oftentimes has not worked. I'm going to be honest, because the biggest issue is always the funding. And I think one of the challenges we've had specifically, again, before the last 18 months, was just the second you stepped out of the HIV, TB, malaria zones, it was really challenging on the resourcing front. So I still think, though, the approach that we've taken stands, that we need to be working in coalitions, thinking about scalability from the start, and really considering, like, what the funding models will be to get us there. I do believe that some of the challenges do bring opportunity, in that the breakdown of the silos will enable the creation of stronger integrated primary care that then opens the door to being able to bring more things into the healthcare system at an overall lower cost. But it's definitely, I mean, I think as a large company, many people come to us sort of for money. And we at this point are pretty transparent that we just don't work that way, because it's not effective.
Thank you. And before we move on to really actionable, concrete recommendations from the panelists, Jay, I wanted to ask you some emerging models, things that you find really exciting in this space, because I know you're working across a really broad set of different actors and stakeholders. You assess and evaluate the success of access strategies and approaches. What are you really excited about?
Ooh, tough one. I can tell you what I'm seeing. I mean, it's hard to get me excited about about things, because I've seen so much data over the last 20 years. But I'll try to have some enthusiasm in this thing. I think there has been a few key trends. Now I'm making everyone laugh and joke. A few key trends, right? There's a large number of funds that have been evolving. That there's been many organizations setting up funds to help co-finance. There is, I think, a number of trends in coordinating and collating data, and I'm most excited about how that influences procurement. And I think, as Joanna mentioned, there's a lot more consortia and coalitions being formed. Often, a lot of these things are working in a kind of like a vertical setting, for HIV, for diabetes care, for women's and children's healthcare in that sense. And I think we can have a lot of efficiencies in if we were to have a platform where some of these models can be shared. I'll give you a couple of things that we've seen just in a minute. So one is, I think the organizations that have been working on pooled and coordinated procurement, they're looking to see whether they can add additional areas and looking at different financing models, but perhaps many people in the room already know that. And I think what's interesting is there's a model now which is run by an organization called AxMed. It's ex-pharma people who have come together. What they've done is they've created a sort of a platform for coordinating procurement across different agencies that buy. But interestingly, a lot of the demand data can be collated, and the demand data is extremely valuable in basically being able to create that predictability that manufacturers actually need. And my hope is that this is not only available for a select number of diseases driven by only a few donor priorities, but it's really available for really the needs that communities are struggling with in terms of the highest burden of diseases. And my hope is that this will also expand into ensuring that procurement is also from local manufacturers in the African continent, for example, especially for products where the procurement supplies can actually be available in a cost-effective way in the continent itself. But there have also been very, very small interventions that I'm quite excited about. We've been struggling for a long time in just saying nothing's being done with the Pacific Islands. Not much attention is there in the Pacific Islands. And there has been some interventions now looking at not trying to do a pool of procurement because there are many different country systems to align on a single procurement contract. So that's a nightmare. But instead, they've come up with another solution, which is a central warehousing location and fixing purchasing to be annual. So countries are more aware of like, what do I need for this year? And even that has made a huge difference in terms of uptake and availability and access. And there are other models outside of medicines. When you're thinking about energy, factories are now looking at solarization so that they can keep the energy costs low so that they can be more cost effective in producing products. We work in medical oxygen, where really making sure that biomedical engineers and service contracts are added on top of the commodity itself means, tells the difference between a broken machine 5 years down the line versus a machine that actually works and is sustainable over time. So having a framework for what those type of contractual agreements could look like when you're thinking of a commodity like oxygen and oxygen systems, I think are some of the areas. But I can keep talking about this for hours, but I'll stop with these few examples to say there are a few things that are coming out that are exciting.
Thank you so much. And yes, I think we could all talk about this for hours. I am seeing the time signal in the back. So I'm going to ask each of you to close with a really concrete recommendation and/or opportunity statement that others can take through in their work. So if you were advising the people in this room, NGOs, multilaterals, innovators, industry, what can they start doing tomorrow to think differently about their market shaping approach? Or what do you wish they would know based on your experience to help expedite how they get to that future good more quickly? Marianne, I'll start with you.
Sure. So and many of you who know me know I always say this, let's get out of our bubbles. So for health, we need to sit at non-health sector tables. There's so much happening outside of health, and I'm excited about the kind of regulatory change happening that's going to build markets, and particularly for the African continent, I think better shape and increase the size of that market. And then the second thing, if you'll allow me, is all of this is possible. I was just in Rwanda, Yasmin, you talked about, not knowing enough data for, kind of demand forecasting. We're there. But what we need to do is come together as a sector to actually call for the right types of investments in the right things at the right time and be very deliberate and intentional about how we build these markets that are going to support all of our work.
Thank you, Marianne. Joanna, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I personally believe that the only path forward is together. I think that at the country level, there's tremendous collaboration between the private and public sector. I think this forum has always been one that has provided that, but I don't think that's true of most of the rest of the global health space. And in fact, I think that the dialogue and the relationships are kind of at some of the worst points they've been in quite a while. And so I just really believe that we have to work together. We have to understand each other's perspectives, and we have to act in good faith to solve these very real problems.
Thank you, Joanna. Yasmin.
Not too different from what has been said, but I think trying to bring in a different angle. I do think really addressing these pain points of fragmentation, asynchronous investments, data, all the rest is really important. But I think for us, it's a challenge for us as a community that is used to working very differently, where we make investments and we put in time and work and we want to see impact fairly quickly. If we're trying to build these ecosystems and build these markets of the future, are we willing to slow down a bit and make sure that really the government we're not just giving lip service to the government being a partner, or civil society, or all these new players that are new. And so, we have to make space for people to join this ecosystem and participate meaningfully. And that takes time, and which means some of our results may take time too. So my question is, are we willing to slow down a little bit and do the hard work of building these ecosystems that really will deliver more affordable access, equitable access to the communities that we're trying to serve?
Thank you. And Jay, I'll leave you with the final word.
Yeah, that's the hardest bit. So I think there are ways that we can unlock financing and capitals. I've written an entire op-ed on that in terms of how many countries can actually look up and set up health taxes via tobacco and sugar taxes, promoting local production to reduce reliance on imports and really build up supply chains, and using a portion of diaspora capital and annual remittances to be channeled towards predictable financing, and also trying to keep money that's being lost when people go out of the African continent to get care abroad, keeping that back in town. But I think there's also a lot of examples out there of things that are working, but they're working in one situation, and it's not easy to transfer that to another situation. But it's also not easy for people to know what is happening in those situations. Like an annual payment model that decouples developers' revenue from the physical volume of drugs sold, which is kind of critical for any low volume restricted product like antibiotics in that sense, right? So I think we need a platform where practices are being shared, not just in terms of I did this, but being shared in a sense where you can also ask questions, say, okay, if I want to bring this into my universe of my land, my product, my ecosystem, and shape the market in a slightly different way, what would that entail? And having access to the right people to do that, I think is one of the critical ways to unlock these examples to become scalable.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we have a challenge ahead, right? The challenge is not just to simply shape markets for products and access and low cost, but to build people-centered, integrated systems and markets that endure. So I'd like to challenge all of you to take that into, our lunch and networking hour, speak to people in other sectors, as Joanna said, understand their business models, how they operate, why they work the way that they work, share best practices, as Jay said. Are you seeing things working? How could they be scaled, replicated in other areas? And really dive in and help us shape that next generation of market shaping approaches. So huge thank you to the panelists for joining. I would love to open it up to Q&A before we go. So if you have a question in the room, please raise your hand and we'll bring the mic around. And if you have a question online, please do put that in the chat and we'll facilitate it from there.
James Berrigan, thanks for a great panel. You guys just so dynamic and topics that are close to my heart. And I just really briefly want to acknowledge, Joanna, your comment about scalability. And it's not just an important criteria, but it also gives you a different lens through which you develop project and you understand stakeholders. So I just want to validate that. And then Yasmin, your focus on emerging middle class is way too often overlooked, I think, in business models generally, and is somewhat problematic as something that we neglect. But I think really the theme that's most dominant and perplexing is this idea of flexible mission-driven financing. And in a way, mission-driven and flexible are contradictory. Because we've got mission-driven people out there, mission-driven organizations out there who want to fund, and they become quite vertical in their focus, and we don't achieve the flexible. And as glass half full as I am as a human being, I get a little pessimistic sometimes at the lack of momentum in that direction. And that flexible mission-driven is all the more important in the context of infrastructure. And each one of you have been speaking to infrastructure, because infrastructure is complex and it's not an easy story to tell to a funder. And so there's like these inherent contradictions that I live and breathe every day, and I know all of you do too. And I'm just interested if you can kind of speak to that innate challenge we're all facing.
Thank you so much, James. Marianne, do you want to take that?
Yes.
Given you raised the term.
I do, and fully agree with everything you said. When I said mission, I did mean, kind of the broader global health equity mission, not necessarily disease specific or vertical programs or projects. I think we need to come together with, a very clear call to action and ask of funders where we're asking for the same things. That really drove our Foundations and Futures report. At the end, there's a call to action. I would love, and I'm just making this up as I'm talking right now, Lisa, Abby and Sarah, can Bay Area Global Health Alliance, be part of building momentum where we are making specific asks, of all of the different types of donors to invest in infrastructure, to invest in the foundations, to invest in building markets that are going to serve all of us. I would love for that to be an outcome, of this meeting. I think it's very hard for funders to say no when multiple types of stakeholders are coming to them together with the same ask. But, I may be proven wrong, but, let's try it.
Thank you, Marianne.
Yes, thank you very much for the interesting conversation, the panel. My name is Payam Nahid. I'm the Executive Director for UCSF Institute for Global Health Sciences. And one question I had for the panel was what opportunities there are to move access conditions and the dialogue around them upstream into the R&D space, which is where I live, and get research institutions to engage in that. Because I heard a lot of downstream activities and financing, and I think a lot of work can be done upstream from the design of our trials and protocols and the information we gather. Of course, it needs funding, and usually these are the activities that are often unfunded. But I wondered what the panel thought about upstream levers for improving access conditions in the R&D space.
Thank you so much. Joanna, do you want to take that?
Sure. Sorry, there's so much swimming around in my head around this topic. This is what I would say, broad strokes from the company perspective. Our experience has been generally when we have moved forward with funding R&D specifically focused on these markets, oftentimes there isn't really a return on the other side. And that's very challenging because the way that companies, there's like all these things, and there's like committees and groups that make decisions about which projects go forward. And candidly, the return on investment is a big part of that equation. So I do think that moving forward with better health system infrastructure, so there are better pathways for things to come in, would be a real game changer. Because I think one of the things over the last decade has been, if it's not an HIV, TB, or malaria product, where's the funding? And I think what's fundamentally different in my experience between these markets and, you know, European markets, many markets in Asia and the US, is that, you know, we think from a standpoint of unmet medical need. And if we identify an unmet medical need and we develop a product that meets that medical need, it will be adopted. But that is oftentimes not true, frankly, because the funding isn't there in many of these markets. So you just sort of end up hitting a wall and then oftentimes being asked, well, can you just, you know, give it away for free? And it's a challenge. The other thing I'm going to say, because I feel like every 2 years I'm interviewed by someone about what we can do to like spark it. We don't need a TPP. That is not the problem. It's not that we don't understand the needs.
You define TPP for
yes,
folks who
a
don't know.
target product profile. I don't need a target product profile, and I don't need a epidemiology-based forecast of the unmet need. Those are not going to help us. It's all about the health system market dynamics that will adopt the product.
Thank you. Go ahead, Abby.
I'm going to share one from online from May from DNDI, which is related. So maybe to continue to build on this, market shaping seems to always be based on incentives from the current profit-driven system. Is anyone working on or aware of emerging ways to better incentivize companies, pharmacies, and governments to value higher health equity and not leave any part of the population behind?
Would you like to keep going on that, or should we?
Well, I would just say I think that's a global problem. I think that's an everywhere problem. And I think more and more something I've noticed is that the issues that I'm dealing with and talking about when I'm in Europe and the US are becoming less and less different than the issues that are being talked about related to low and middle income countries. So I think that there is a fundamental tension between a profit-based health system and providing public health. I don't think that should be localized to LMICs. I think we need to, as societies, be having that conversation, and if it's ultimately delivering the outcomes we want for our society. That's me speaking.
Jay, I'm curious from your work as well. Have you uncovered any emerging functions, bodies, alliances, mechanisms, or means that help align incentives in this way?
Yeah, a number of things, and it touches on the previous question also. So we've been doing a bit of a round between all the different funding organizations of some of the largest R&D projects in the world, right? So NIH, Cancer Research UK, Gates Wellcome, those that are already invested in low-income countries and those who are not yet invested in low-income country innovations. And you can see, there's, again, not a platform where they can understand how can you do this? What are the terms and conditions that you can actually put on the table far upstream or already as an investor investing in a company that is practical enough to not dissuade innovation in some way, right? And we've built a number of frameworks that Wellcome Trust now uses. NIH, we did some consultations where they talked to us a little bit about, what can we do at the university level that doesn't downstream disincentivize the commercialization of a particular product. We've worked with CEPI on their platform. What can they put in contractually, what not in that sense. So there are different ways that you can incentivize, better R&D where it ends up reaching the patients. And surprisingly, in the last 20 years, we've measured how pharmaceutical companies are doing kind of earlier access planning for R&D products. And actually, it's been going really uphill, like mostly. Initially, there was no companies that really had any early access plans that was paired into with their innovative developments with no guarantees that these products will actually be made in low-income countries. And over the years, most of the pharmaceutical companies we measure now have a plan, but the plan is not at scale in multiple countries, right? It's in a few LMICs, but at least most of the companies actually have a plan for something in place. When you're thinking about, really changing the incentive system, a number of pharmaceutical companies, a number of mid-sized companies also are looking at cost production and availability of products, or second or dual brand systems. So some of those are really testing their limits of the profit margins they're willing to make, but it obviously hasn't gone enough to to really address the affordability gaps in the world yet.
Yep, go ahead. I do want to clarify one thing related to that question because I don't want my comments to be misunderstood. I think from our perspective, what we are looking for is to be able to fund the R&D and then be able to provide the product in the way and at the cost that it costs us to manufacture and provide the service. A nonprofit has the same constraints as that, right? So I think there is also a big gap between, it's one thing to be talking about trying to make very, very large profits, but it's another thing to just be talking about, is the basic return on investment there, that if you invest the resources to develop it, and then there will be reasonable pricing, people to buy it, to make it sustainable. And we're still not seeing that in a lot of places. So I do want to just clarify that that's kind of the bar I'm speaking about.
Thank you so much. Any other questions in the room or online?
Hi, Scott Rosenblum with Global Impact Advisors. And I was just curious how the panel thought about the relationship between the efforts, especially since COVID, to build local and regional manufacturing capacity amidst market shaping that often puts kind of a focus on lower costs, but also sustainable markets, wholesale distribution, and the like. And where are their tensions and where's their complementarity? Thanks.
Thank you so much for that question. Yasmin, would you like to discuss this a little bit, the local manufacturing?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And it's a great question. I think some of these conversations from the local level, local government and industry level are really nascent. So I think some of them are still starting. And I think you sort of put your finger on or pointed to some of the challenges, or perhaps someone did earlier. So I think, understanding the size of the market is a really important gap, that is existing right now. And then also, and this is why I think I was speaking to the need for data earlier. So I think there's a lot of, in a place like Kenya, and I'm sure Jay knows a lot more about this, but there's a lot of vibrant discussions around and people entering the marketplace to understand where are the opportunities. And I think one of the big challenges is it's hard to pinpoint those opportunities from size of market perspective, especially in one country. And if you look across East Africa as a community, for example, there is potentially, the size of the market that would validate sort of going into this space. But our regulatory barriers across countries are so high that, and the data, trying to sort of aggregate that data, that is where some of the challenges are. And then I think the other parts of the conversation I've been hearing are, how do we decide what to manufacture first or at the same time? How do we prioritize some of those? So for example, do we look at, and I think this speaks to May's question, do we look at those products that there's no incentive off continent to manufacture those products that speak to some of the NTDs, the neglected tropical diseases and other things that we might have. Like how do we, and these are some of the conversations that I think are happening, how do we decide what is a priority? Do we want to find a balance between those life-saving commodities that we need to make sure we have a sustainable market for, and regardless of what happens, COVID or, fuel crisis in the Middle East, we're still going to be able to assure that we can assure a supply of those products locally, for example. But, is cancer, the cancer oncology market something we need to look at? And so I think there's all these conversations happening that are trying to understand what the size of the market is, what potential profitability, because even locally, that is something that is obviously being considered. And then also thinking through the risk around, and there's also capacity. Kenya has a couple of really good examples of, and not product, but syringe manufacturing. And now I'm looking at, I think the latest one last week was a device one. And so there are some good stories, but I think what we miss in those stories is what is the impact going to be of some of those very great success stories of local manufacturing, but are they really speaking to the problems that we have? I'm not sure I fully answered your question, but I don't think we've evolved enough in this space to be able to answer it fully. One of my panelists might have more to add, though.
Thank you.
Go ahead,
Yasmin.
Marianne.
Yeah, and something you said prompted this. I think, one point to make, and I think this relates, Joanna, to, some of what you were sharing, is that the same issues that, Roche or Merck or Sanofi has in terms of making the business case work, for manufacturing certain products where, the market is, let's just say East Africa. Those problems exist for the local manufacturer as well, and so I don't think we should, we should not think of local manufacturing as solving the problem without dealing with all of the other contextual market shaping barrier removals that need to happen. But then the other thing I want to put on the table, because I don't think we've said it explicitly, whether you're in a high income country, middle income country, or I guess theoretically in a lower income country, governments has been, and I think will continue to be, the biggest purchaser of health. They're not necessarily the biggest deliverer of health. I think in high income countries, we see multiple different types of delivery systems and delivery mechanisms for health. But at the end of the day, through insurance, et cetera, they're mostly the biggest purchaser of health. In many low-income countries, that is not yet the case, or at least not the case for a broad array of health needs. And so, again, I just come back to this point around, unless we strengthen, kind of government ability, whether it's through universal healthcare coverage or some other type of insurance, or, kind of subsidizing folks getting care from, private sector, we will not solve, the ultimate market failure, which is making sure that there is the ability, for consumers, for end users, for patients, to have access, to the products and to the solutions.
That's a really important point. Thank you. And I see one final question over
one
here.
question. It's sort of broad, but I think we can maybe help sort of tie things up. And the first and foremost, the four of you are really inspiring communicators in a really, really important area, and we really, really need that. I'll come back to you. So I'm Fred Senko. I'm a local physician. I helped my brother Paul start UGHE 8 years ago in Rwanda, and I've been very engaged in that, and so recently gotten into health. The elephant in the room is that the public partnership right now in this country is just diminishing. It's disappearing. And the concern that I have working also at Stanford is there's a retrenchment also at the academic level. And to come back to what Rafi was saying, we need to tee up creativity and risk-taking, and that the large institutions, both Stanford, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, they're retrenching on that. At the same time, and Joanna, this reflects to you, we have a population around, an extraordinary population around the world where NCDs are growing in their significance, and there are real markets. And yet the strategics, I feel I've bumped my head against the wall many times trying to get therapeutics, diagnostics into these places, and the strategics not understanding the medium and the long-term view of that. So my question to the four of you, as incredible communicators, as incredible stories, how can we do a better job? And maybe this is the Bayer Global Health Alliance is going to do this or something, but how do we become better communicators of this really significant situation?
Thank you so much. Marianne, I might come back to you because you've been doing a lot of thinking on this issue, particularly in the NCD space. And then I'll ask others if you want to build.
I think this comes back to the health equity question. I think for too long, we and I use the metaphorical we have excluded huge swaths of the population of this world from dignity, kind of human value and right to health. And I think until we bring all of those people into who we think deserve health and should be part of our market, and we build, with that underlying assumption, we're all just kind of, not being honest with ourselves.
Joanna, go ahead.
I agree with Marianne, and I also have actually a slightly different perspective, given that my role is to figure out how to communicate with governments in terms of what they care about today to get them to spend more money on health. And now is not the easiest moment to do that. And I do think we need to broaden the message, and I think we need to be connecting more the realities of population health to economics, GDP growth, global health security. When you have countries that are left behind, when you have countries where people have no hope, that is not good for many of the issues that our governments do care about today. So I also think one of the challenges that we have as a global health community is we really like to sit together and talk to each other. And how do we figure out how to bring in other stakeholders? Something we talk about a lot is how can we better engage ministers of finance, not just ministers of health? How do we sort of broaden this to think about the broader implications for societies, their health and their growth if we don't make the right investments in healthcare? And I absolutely agree with you. I mean, NCDs is front and center with this TB, malaria, HIV issue of like, we have this huge NCD piece coming up and we need to be investing in it and thinking about it.
Excellent. So I think with that, we will close today's discussion. A huge thank you for your engagement, participation, to the panelists for your really insightful comments. Maybe next year we can give an update on the future of market shaping. So thank you.
Well, one more round of applause. Thank you so much. What a powerful panel. Well, we are just running a couple minutes behind, but I think today was one of the richest discussions I've heard in a long time. So thank you to Sarah and Abby and Lisa. Let's also give them a round of applause. There's so much thought and effort put into discussion topics and speakers and meeting where we all are in terms of what is top of mind. And they're just always ahead of the curve in being able to put an event like this together. In just 1 minute, I'm going to try to quickly summarize all of the amazing discussion that we had, and some of the advice that we've gotten from our panels and our speakers. Getting out of our bubble, I think that is a huge one. And I think I would encourage all of us to think about that as we go into the networking session. Aligning on our asks, and perhaps this is a community that can really come together and get concrete about tangible next steps. And as a collective, maybe we'll have more success with those who have the funding and the power. Is there a more advanced role we can take in communication and advocacy? I think all of us come from such different corners of the globe and don't necessarily think of ourselves as advocates or communicators, but perhaps there's a bigger role for all of us to play. In the market shaping to market building session, we talked about, some of the lower hanging fruit in terms of market shaping, drug price reduction, and how perhaps the next era of global health is a bit more multidimensional, really moving from, price reductions into more systems level change, thinking about human-centered design, thinking about health infrastructure, and kind of moving back into our discussion with Rafi. I mentioned low-hanging fruit, but really, is there any low-hanging fruit in our sector? And perhaps that's a huge advantage for us, thinking about the benefit of the friction, the benefit of the challenges that we've endured for so many decades. And just a very quick anecdote, when I first started at Path, my role was around commercialization and licensing. And I had a mentor who came from the private sector. And he was in-house counsel at a big tech company. And when he came to Path and was guiding our team, he said, it wasn't until I got to Path that I truly understood the power of partnership. Because what I was doing before was very transactional. I had the power, we could bully people around. But when you get into our sector, it's really about a win-win, creating a win-win situation. And I thought that was really beautiful. And the power of the friction that we all deal with day to day, let us not underappreciate that. And what I would love to leave us on is what Rafi said around, we probably have a lot more power than we think we do. And how do we leverage that? How do we stay curious, leverage our power, spark a conversation? And I think the Alliance is a perfect place to do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to close us out. But thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Neha. That was wonderful. And thank you so much to our speakers. It was so much. My brain is swimming. I think Joanna had used that. Your brain is swimming. Mine is certainly doing so, from everything from like Marianne and this upstream collective to show and tell to so many other different things. But for now, I just wanted to, I know I am standing between you all and making more connections with each other and just kind of talking and getting an opportunity to build more relationships and trust, because we know community matters, you all matter, and it matters that you have an opportunity to connect and take some of this curiosity and some of the wonderful conversations we've had and take them to the next level so that it actually can really help advance innovation and equity. And that's why we're all here, to do that collectively. So lunch is served. Please stay and network and meet new people and have an opportunity. And please feel free to ask any of us, for Abby, Lisa, and I here in the room, as well as our board members, Neha and Krista and Payam and Larkin are here as well. And any of our speakers, we'd love to hear more from you. And thank you again.